The girl is sitting on the ground, looking totally exhausted and covered in dirt. She barely has the energy to move when she looks out at the busy area in front of her. She can't believe her eyes and starts to wonder what kind of place she actually ended up in. People are just walking past her like she isn't even there, but then she notices someone standing right over her. She looks up from the ground as the person gets closer, and it's a young boy looking down at her. He doesn't seem too worried, just asks if she's still alive, so the girl just stares at him for a second. Without even thinking about it, she says the name Pakis and instantly covers her mouth. She looks completely shocked by what she just said, since it's a name she shouldn't even know. It just slipped out of her mouth, and she starts realizing that she actually knows who this kid is. It clicks that he's the one in charge of this whole place, while the boy just keeps looking at her. He seems curious and asks her what exactly happened to her. Pakis looks at the girl, sounding a little surprised that she can finally talk normally now. He explains the reason she got kicked was because she refused to hand over the money to the boss, so he asks if she even remembers that money. The girl just sits there looking exhausted and beat up, and Pakis mentions how badly she got wrecked back then. He keeps talking to her, but the girl's mind is somewhere else. She starts thinking back to what happened before all this. Turns out she has memories of a completely different life. She's pretty sure she used to be Japanese and spent her time working as a researcher. She remembers wearing glasses and staring at screens, just living a life that was completely ordinary. There wasn't anything exciting or crazy about it, it was honestly nothing special. She just sat at her desk like everyone else in the office, and it felt like those days would just keep repeating forever, like an endless loop. The girl remembers that specific day she needed to buy some sweets for a client, so she stopped at a department store after finishing work. She's carrying the shopping bag when she stands by the escalators. That's when she looks up and sees something coming, and she barely has time to react as she looks down at the ground for a second. Looking back up, she realizes a kid is falling from the floor above her, and her eyes go wide as she watches the child dropping through the air, but her body just moves on its own. She reaches out her arms to catch the kid before she takes the full impact, grabbing the child tight as they both go down hard. Her head slams right into the floor just like that, and honestly, she's pretty sure that was the moment she died. Her life should have ended right there on that floor, but suddenly another set of memories starts to flood in. Pakis rubs his head and complains about how bad his brother beat him up, while she realizes the memories of this new body named Furim are starting to mix with her own. Pakis just shrugs it off and says it's time to get back to work. This kid is Pakis, and he's the one she's been following around since waking up. In this part of the world, the mafia calls all the shots, and it turns out Pakis is actually one of the sons of the big boss, Dugga. The original girl who owned this body seemed to really like him, but honestly, he's just a total good-for-nothing who no one should ever rely on. As for what the two of them were actually doing together, it wasn't anything good. Pakis starts yelling at the top of his lungs for everyone to step right up because everything is cheap, and it turns out they've set up a little business selling water right in the middle of town. Pakis keeps shouting for people to come get their water while Furim stands right there with him, and he starts pitching it hard, telling the crowd it's great for their health and that it's actually made with magic. The market gets pretty busy as people start noticing the stall and walking over to see what the hype is about. One old guy takes a drink and says it's delicious, while someone else in the crowd calls out for 5 more cups. A guy with a goatee isn't so sure. He asks if it's really that good since it tastes like normal water to him. But the real secret behind the whole operation is the source of where that water actually comes from. Furim holds her hands out and commands the water to come forth, using all her focus to make it happen. This is the special water magic she's been using to keep the business running. Furim spends her days helping Pakis out with the water business. But even though she's working hard, it's pretty clear Pakis doesn't really get how volume and pricing are supposed to work. She looks at the jars and realizes that selling nearly 2 liters for that price doesn't add up. Yet Pakis looks pretty hyped holding the bag of money after a long day of pouring water. He hands a bit of it over and tells Furim that this is her pay for all the work she did. All she really gets for her trouble is some sour-smelling bread and a bowl of soup, and Pakis tells her to eat up. But she's mostly focused on the fact that she only walked away with 2 tiny copper coins. She doesn't know the exact math behind everything, but she can tell that a huge chunk of their money is getting skimmed off since most of the cash they made today is being held by someone else entirely. Furim just sits there watching as all that money they earned gets sucked up by people higher up the food chain. Furim looks completely drained, her eyes showing just how much this new life is wearing her down. She huddles up on the ground as the rain pours over her, thinking about how this world is just straight-up cruel. She mutters that at least she's alive, but Pakis walks up looking confused and asks her what she's on about. So Furim immediately shuts down the conversation and tells him it's nothing, making sure to call him sir to stay in his good graces. She just stands there in the rain with a blank look, feeling totally numb to everything happening around her. The reality of the situation hits hard as she curls up on the dirt, wishing she just had a simple roof over her head. As she follows Pakis through the town, she can't even tell if this nightmare is real or if she's stuck in a dream. Either way, it doesn't really matter. She realizes the only thing she can actually do is fight to survive. Her days are a total grind where she's dragged out of bed, forced to eat gross food and worked until she's exhausted. And to make things worse, the whole place is primitive and the bathrooms are beyond disgusting. Furim looks back at her life and realizes she was probably dumped by her parents, leaving her to survive on the streets, just another kid caught up in a criminal gang. She notices that even though magic is pretty common in this world, her ability to make clean, great-tasting water is actually a big deal. It's so easy for her to do that it even shocks her, and it turns out this skill is worth a lot to the people running things. But that value comes with a price, and Furim gets punched right in the face as she realizes Pakis is standing over her, screaming at her to stop messing around. He's working her to the bone every single day, and all she can do is huddle on the ground and tell him she understands. Dugga actually likes the water she produces and even gave her a little cash for it. But even that isn't enough to make this life any easier. Furim thinks back to how things went south. She remembers Pakis' boss taking the money she earned, realizing that every single part of this life is just completely rotten. She spends her days slumped over by the giant water jars, totally drained while Pakis walks off, just sitting there on the ground and using her magic to keep the water flowing. As she watches the water, she thinks to herself that this is actually the only fun part of her day, but then a hand reaches out and grabs her by the hair. Furim cries out in pain as Pakis yanks her along, yelling at her to hurry up while a guy nearby just watches. The guy actually steps in and tells Pakis that he's overdoing it and needs to stop making Pakis turn around and give him this cold, scary look with one eye. Furim is left standing there in the shadows, looking small and completely worn out by everything. Furim sees what happens when people mess with Pakis. Basically, they get beaten within an inch of their lives and left rotting. She just stares at the mess, completely silent and unable to look away from the reality of this place. The whole situation is just seriously gross and makes her feel sick to her stomach. Furim realizes how bad things are getting, while Pakis is busy thinking they need to find an exit strategy soon, but her vision starts to blur as she looks down at the dirt. Pakis tells her to move it, but then he hears a thud and turns around to see she's hit the deck. Furim groans from the floor, and Pakis crouches down to ask what's up or if her legs just gave out. She looks up with this weak smile and tells him that she's actually just getting really hungry. Pakis looks pretty confused and asks if she didn't just eat her normal amount of food, leaving Furim to joke that she must be hitting a growth spurt, though she's secretly wondering if her appetite is just getting bigger. Pakis looks down with a pretty beat-up face, just quietly mumbling that he guessed things are going that way. Furim is totally wiped out on the ground, looking like she's about to lose her lunch from the exhaustion. Pakis loses his cool and starts yelling right in her face, asking if she's even listening or just being an idiot, but he keeps them moving, barkingly telling her to just do what he says because he's got his own stuff to pay for. The kid is clearly stressed out, breathing hard while his eyes show he's just trying to survive the day. Later on, a huge voice yells at some poor guy to stop sleeping and get up, calling him trash. Furim just mumbles a quick okay. She stands there looking pretty rough, realizing her small attempt at pushing back didn't work at all. However, she hasn't totally given up yet. She's got a look in her eyes like there's still some kind of plan in the works. It's been a few days since she first arrived here, and a guard just waves her and Pakis through the entrance, leading to them passing by a guy who looks nearly dead, though Pakis just keeps walking and says he doesn't care at all. Furim is standing there clutching her shirt, looking pretty nervous because today is the day she has to get the water ready for the big boss. Since Boss Dugga was poisoned once before, his room is locked down tight, so Pakis tells her to stop stalling and just get moving already. Furim starts sweating as she realizes exactly what this situation means, and she knows if she's going to make a move and take a chance at changing things, it's basically now or never. She finally enters the room and Dugga looks up, noticing her standing there. The boss is just chilling on his chair and lets out a whoa before asking if her name is Furim, and while she stands there looking tiny, he actually mentions that the water she brought him earlier was great. Even with the compliment, she's internally losing it because the guy is just way too scary to be around. Dugga gives her a quick thank you, which just makes her want to finish the job and get out of there as fast as she can. Dugga points over and tells her to use a specific bottle for the collection, making her stop and take a good look at it. Furim starts cleaning the jug but notices it's covered in gross slime and dirt, which makes her stop and nervously call out to the boss. Dugga turns around in his chair and asks her what's up, so she points out that the bottle is actually really dirty and asks if he's sure it's okay to use. He just tells her it's fine, but Furim sees something that makes her stop in her tracks. She lets out a confused sound right before she nearly jumps out of her skin. Dugga is suddenly standing right over her, looking massive and scary. His huge, bandaged hand reaches out toward her, and in one quick motion, he snatches the jug right out of her grip. Furim can only watch in shock as he takes over, but then Dugga glares toward the back of the room and yells at one of his men. He reminds the guy that he already gave him orders to wash this jug, but the guy just stands there acting clueless. He asks if the boss even said that, playing it off like it's no big deal. Dugga doesn't feel like talking anymore and just decks the guy with a brutal uppercut to the jaw. Dugga keeps shouting about how he has no use for anyone who ignores his direct orders, calling the guy total trash while Furim stands nearby shaking. He tells his other men to drag the guy out, and they laugh as they take him away. Dugga sighs and walks back, mentioning that now it's finally just the two of them as he settles in. He tells Furim he's actually glad she noticed how dirty the jug was. He starts wiping it down himself, and while Furim answers nervously, she's surprised he's doing it. But then she realizes she has to come clean about something and tries to speak up. She's so scared her words get all twisted, and she just ends up blurting out a messy apology. Dugga looks over at her, totally confused, and asks what she's even apologizing for. Furim admits she couldn't bring herself to use the money he gave her to buy food recently. Dugga stops what he's doing, sounding totally confused as he asks what actually happened to the money, and Furim looks down, trembling while she admits the local guys around there ended up stealing it from her. She goes completely silent, waiting for him to blow up at her for losing the cash, just gripping her dress as hard as she can while she braces for the worst. Dugga just stares off to the side for a second, simply saying he gets it, which makes the room feel even heavier until he tells her to pour him some water. Furim answers right away, but then, he adds that she needs to come over to his side once she's finished with that. Furim is totally caught off guard when Dugga points to a plate of food and tells her to eat it, so she drops into a deep bow, shouting that she will, though she's still shaking like crazy. Dugga doesn't say another word, just watching her with a look that's hard to read. Ever since that day with the stolen money, Dugga has been calling Furim into his office way more often, and it turns out things are actually changing for the better Pakis, and the older guys aren't being nearly as violent as they used to be. Furim lets Dugga know she's finished with her work, and he just gives her a casual nod, telling her she should stay and eat some food again today. Furim gets all excited and thanks him as much as she can, realizing that while the boss is still just as scary as ever, her situation is actually starting to look up. She walks through the halls thinking about how her quality of life is finally improving, especially since she spends her days selling water now. Even though Pakis is still stuck supervising her and looking annoyed, she's finding ways to be useful, like making sure to listen to everything people say while she's refilling water at the inn or the pharmacy. The lady at the apothecary even shows her different herbs, and as Furim runs around with her water jars, she accepts that this is just the way things are in this world. She's determined to gather every little bit of information she can, all just to make sure she becomes more valuable to the boss. Back in the office, Dugga sits back while the whole place stays busy with everyone working around him. Dugga looks down at Furim, wondering what's going on in her head while she just stares back, knowing she has to make a move if she ever wants to change her life. Dugga lets out a surprised sound when Furim suddenly pipes up to grab his attention, and even though Dugga feels like he's taking a huge gamble, she straight up asks if she can help him count all the money. The boss is totally stunned and asks her if she actually knows how to do math, which makes the guys in the back lose it. They start laughing and saying there's no way a little kid could ever do that. They tell her to just hand over the water and get out, but Dugga immediately snaps and tells them to shut their mouths. Then he looks over at the table full of coins and tells Furim to go ahead and give it a try. As she starts working, she realizes the boss is the only one here who actually understands numbers, and he's being super careful. She thinks about how this is her chance to finally get trusted with the important stuff, and the realization hits her hard. Furim looks down at the massive pile of currency and starts to panic because there are way more types of coins than she ever expected, and it hits her that she actually knows absolutely nothing about how money works in this country. Dugga notices her freezing up and leans in, asking what's wrong and if the job is just too much for her, but Furim points to the coins she's already sorted and asks him if she's supposed to stop right there. She looks up at him with a serious face and tells him there's something specific she wants to try with the rest, so the boss just tells her to go for it, but warns her not to push herself too hard. Dugga sits back and says they can worry about the final total later while Furim gets back to work, which is exactly what she wanted. She knows she just has to prove she's useful to him to stay safe. She remembers that she actually studied economics back in her past life as a researcher, and now that she's dealing with money, she's finally in her element and ready to show what she can really do. Furim holds up one of the old coins, thinking that even though they're worn down, she can still handle the sorting. And a few moments later, she lets Dugga know that she's finally finished with the first batch. Dugga looks down at the table and is completely baffled by the way the coins are laid out, asking her how she even sorted them. So she explains that she didn't just group them by type, but also by how clean or dirty they were. She goes on to show him that she even put all the coins into neat stacks of 10, making sure to mention that she did it this way because it'll make the final count a lot faster later on. Furim admits she can't get through the entire pile of money right this second, but she looks Dugga right in the eye and tells him she really wants to be useful to him, starting with this task. The boss takes it all in, while one of his guys, Kedin, speaks up and says the kid is actually pretty handy, but Dugga tells Kedin to shut it before he gets punched, and the guy just laughs it off. Dugga looks at the organized stacks and asks the kid where she even learned to do something like that, which makes Furim panic a bit, so she makes up a story about seeing a kid at a food stall doing the same thing. Dugga just stares at the table for a second, taking in how much work she actually did, before leaning in close to tell her that she needs to start helping him out with this stuff immediately. Furim is internally celebrating because she finally feels useful, and she wonders if she should go tell Pakis, but Dugga mentions he'll be the one to let the youngest guy know, so she shouldn't worry about it. She takes a second to realize this is a huge step forward for her, but then she notices something gross. Dugga is casually licking his thumb to grip the coins better. Furim speaks up to get his attention, and the boss just looks at her like he's wondering what's wrong. She tells him straight up that he should probably stop licking his fingers after touching all that dirty money. Furim explains to the boss how some metals are actually bad for people, warning him that they can be poisonous if too much gets into his system. Dugga completely loses it, yelling out to ask if that's actually true. The idea of poison really seems to freak him out. He goes quiet for a second, just looking down and thinking things over while the room stays silent, until he finally breaks the silence and calls out her name, looking like he's finally made up his mind. Dugga points right at her and says that starting today, she's officially working directly under him, which leaves Furim totally shocked. The kid nervously stammers out a yes sir in response, even though neither of them knows where this choice is going to lead, but she tells herself that anything has to be better than having to work under Pakis again. Later on, Furim is over the moon as she dives onto a bed screaming about finally having a room of her own. She sprawls out, thinking about how even though the place is small, it's her first private space, plus she even got some new clothes. She's just relieved that she won't ever have to sleep out in the rain again, but then Dugga calls her name to get her back to work. Dugga looks down at the kid and asks how much she was actually getting paid every day, but Furim just looks at the floor and tells him it was only 2 copper coins. Dugga looks surprised and says that according to the reports he saw, she should have been getting way more. It's just a guess, but he thinks someone was skimming a massive cut of her pay the whole time. He holds his head in his hands, looking stressed while he apologizes for what his sons were doing. So Furim changes the subject and asks how they're going to sell the water from now on. Dugga tells her she needs to stay close to him, saying they can just have the stuff moved right from where they are. He tells her it looks like she's actually worth keeping around, which makes Furim light up with a big yes. She gets all fired up, thinking this is finally her chance to prove herself to the boss. The kid suddenly shouts for the boss and asks if she can go clean up, leaving Dugga totally confused by the request. Dugga tells her to suit herself if she really wants to clean, so Furim shouts a huge thank you and runs off immediately, thinking about how one specific spot has been bugging her for a long time. She stops right in front of the bathroom, staring at just how dirty the whole place has gotten. It's not just the room though. She looks at the short flight of outdoor stairs leading up to it, thinking about how the steps get all muddy and dangerous whenever it starts raining outside. Furim looks around both ways to make sure the coast is clear and no one is around to see. Then she stops and takes a massive breath, focusing all her energy on the magic she's about to use. She calls out for the water to blast forward exactly like a high-powered pressure washer, but the force of it is way more than she expected, leaving her looking completely shocked as a massive wall of water just takes over, flooding the entire walkway in a second. Furim completely loses it as the water spray goes totally out of control, and she ends up flat on her back on the wet floor, thinking that really scared her, but she isn't ready to give up just yet. She gets this look in her eyes and tells herself that if she just tweaks the magic a little bit more, it'll work perfectly. Back at the base, one of the guys is laughing about how wild Furim is, while Dugga just stands there in the background looking annoyed. Dugga looks around the empty doorway, wondering where the hell everyone went, and shouts at his guys to see if they've spotted Furim, but then someone grabs his shoulder. His face goes totally pale as he sees a literal wall of water coming right for him. Furim accidentally lets loose a massive flood that completely wipes out Dugga and the rest of the crew. She lets out a tiny gasp when she sees the mess she just made, and then she screams for her boss as the water carries everyone away in a giant wave. Furim tries to explain herself while everyone is still soaking wet, shouting that she was honestly just trying to clean the hallway and the bathroom. She runs off while the crew just stands there in shock, yelling back that the place is way cleaner now and she's down to do whatever it takes. One of the guys pats her on the head and tells her she did a good job, but Furim is secretly terrified, thinking there's no way she can keep living with this much danger. Dugga decides it's time to move on and suggests they go get some food, and Furim is all for it, waving her arms and acting like a total kid. She tells herself that if she just uses her water magic and the knowledge from her past life, she's definitely going to survive this world later on. Dugga is sitting back with a drink, thinking about how he's got a really strange brat working under him now. He stares at the water in his cup, thinking about how the kid can actually use magic and seems way more knowledgeable than any other beginner. He also can't get over that hair color, since it's something you just don't see anywhere else in this place. Dugga figures he made the right choice picking the kid up, knowing from the start there was something different about them. And he looks across the room and asks his people when exactly that brat ended up hanging out with Pakis. Dugga looks confused, but his crew member reminds him that he's the one who promised the next person to join the gang would be Pakis' subordinate, which makes Dugga stop and think for a second. He asks if he really said something like that while the lady standing nearby looks totally stressed out. She tells him he definitely said it while they were all out drinking and mentions that Pakis was actually really happy about the idea too. Dugga sits back and thinks it over, admitting that he ended up taking the new kid for himself and feels kind of bad for Pakis now, but he just stares at his drink and figures what's done is done. He can't really change things now. The room is quiet for a moment as the morning sun starts to hit the furniture. Furim finally wakes up and gives a huge yawn, stretching her arms out while she yells out a big morning greeting to everyone. Later on, Morga brings up some bad news, telling the boss that it looks like their gambling den has been losing a lot of customers lately. Furim looks pretty worried as someone warns Morga to drop it, saying he's just going to put Dugga in a terrible mood again. Morga keeps going anyway, explaining that some guy named Lukat started a new gambling racket nearby and is basically stealing all their business. Dugga rubs his chin and thinks about the gambling situation, wondering if there's a way to fix the problem. He turns to Furim and asks if she has any bright ideas, which catches her completely off guard as she stammers back. He stares her down and asks if she's really got nothing to say, while she just stands there sweating and trying to think of an answer. She tells him she's not sure, but secretly thinks about how her past life in Japan was full of stuff like this. She wants to help, but she realizes it would look way too suspicious if a little girl like her suddenly started giving out expert gambling advice. Furim looks down and tries to act innocent. She tells him that she's never even seen a gambling den before, so she wouldn't know. Dugga gets fired up and yells at her for saying she's never seen the guy they're talking about, making her panic and apologize like crazy. The boss lets out a loud shout as he finally makes a decision on how to handle things. He sits back and tells the crew to take Morga and Furim to go check out the gambling dens in person. The guy nearby says he's on it, but Furim is just standing there frozen, and she starts stressing out, wondering if they're really going right now and how she's supposed to help the boss with this kind of work. Dugga leans back in his chair and makes it clear that coming up with a plan is Furim's job this time around. He says that the younger generation usually has way better ideas for things like this anyway. He looks right at her and says they need something fresh immediately, then tells Furim he's counting on her, and Morga signals that it's time to move, so Furim just nods and follows him out. As she walks, she starts wondering what actually goes on inside a gambling den since she's never been to one. The more she thinks about it, the more she realizes she's never liked gambling and honestly hates being part of this. But as soon as they step inside, the place is a total mess of noise and energy that catches her off guard. People are everywhere, screaming and losing their minds over whatever games are going on in the room. The entire building feels like it's vibrating from how rowdy the crowd is getting. Everywhere she looks, there are guys yelling and laughing like crazy, completely caught up in the heat of the moment. The crowd is screaming for blood as a guy with a sword stands in a cage. Furim realizes this is a real arena. A guard pulls a chain and tells a kneeling person to hurry up and walk, while Furim just stands there watching. She notices the collars around their necks and starts wondering if all these people are actually slaves, which becomes obvious when the fighters start screaming at each other while trying to kill one another with real weapons. Furim is completely shaken and can't understand how something this messed up is even allowed to happen. She ends up back at her desk looking like she's about to throw up because she can't get the images out of her head. She feels disgusted with herself for being so blind and never even trying to think about what was really going on. Looking down at the coins on her table, she thinks about all the money she's been counting since she got here. It hits her that every cent came from the people who paid to watch slaves murder each other for fun. And the realization that even the food she's been eating was paid for with that blood money makes everything worse. Furim stands there staring into the dark, finally realizing her life was paid for with the lives of others. The weight of everything hits her all at once, and she just feels absolutely awful inside. She covers her mouth and starts gagging, thinking about how she was just one mistake away from being a slave herself. Furim starts coughing uncontrollably, barely able to keep her balance while standing on the floor. Morga notices her struggling and looks pretty worried, asking if she's actually doing okay since she looks so sick. She forces a fake smile and lies about the food smelling too good, but she's really just trying to buy time to observe. Images of the brutal arena fights keep flashing in her mind, making her feel small and totally trapped. Looking at the blood on the ground, she thinks about how cruel this place is and how she can only stand there watching. She starts thinking about her situation, having all this knowledge from her past life and being able to use magic. But looking at the horror around her, she realizes how naive she was to think she could actually save everyone. Furim realizes just how naive her hopes really were. Looking back at everything, she feels so foolish, because the reality of this world is way more cruel than she ever thought it would be. She stands there in the dark feeling completely useless, apologizing over and over because she couldn't save anyone. It's a heavy realization that she can't bring back the lives already lost in this place, but she remembers the boss is actually waiting on her for some new ideas. She decides there might still be a way to flip the situation, so she calls out to Morga. With a serious look on her face, she asks him to take her to the area where they keep the slaves. While she's heading over, a guy walks out of a room and notices her calling out Furim's name. She says hello to him, recognizing him as Rado, who she knows is Pakis' older brother. Rado gives her a friendly smile, but immediately asks her what happened to his little brother Pakis. Furim looks a little on edge as she explains she's actually busy with a different job today, working for the boss himself. She gives a pretty vague answer, but Rado doesn't let it go and asks her what she's doing hanging around this area anyway. She explains the boss is looking to shake things up at the gambling den, and he actually asked her to come up with some new ideas. So, because of that, she tells him she's headed down to take a look at the slave quarters. Rado just laughs it off, saying the old man only knows how to run old-school bets. Then he asks if the boss was alone. Furim mentions that Morga was actually with him, but she thinks back to him being totally passed out. Rado just says that sounds like Morga. Rado decides that if she has permission, then it's probably fine, but he tells her to be careful since it gets dangerous back there. He looks her right in the eyes and warns her that a kid like her might just get chewed up in a place like that. The hallway leading deeper into the quarters is dark and gloomy, lined with heavy iron cages on both sides. As Furim walks past the cells, a prisoner suddenly grips the bars and screams at her, asking what she's looking at. Rado gives her one last warning, joking that she might just get bitten after all, leaving Furim looking pretty stressed as she heads inside. The cages are full of people either broken or losing their minds, and Furim can't help but think about how they're all just human beings, which makes her wonder why things have to be so cruel. Her eyes start tearing up just looking at the misery around her when a massive hand reaches out of the shadows and someone asks if she's lost. Furim completely loses it and lets out a loud scream, scrambling backward while trying to find the words to explain why she's there. The guy tells her to please calm down, but she's still too shocked to even move. He looks her in the eye and promises he isn't going to do anything to hurt her. And we can see he's a tall, thin guy with a shaved head, wearing a heavy slave collar around his neck. He introduces himself as Logan, the slave overseer for the area, and he gently tells her one more time not to be afraid. Furim takes a deep breath and tries to stop shaking, finally managing to tell him that her name is Flim. Logan asks if she's got a second to talk. He really wants to hear her story, which makes Furim speak up, explaining she's only there because boss Dugga gave her orders to come. Logan looks at her, pretty surprised a little kid is there alone. He asks if she really came all by herself. Furim explains that Morga was actually supposed to be her guide, but the guy got way too drunk and left her hanging. Logan just nods. He says he gets what happened now and tells her there's no point in just standing around in the dark, so he asks her to follow him. Furim follows behind and quietly thanks him for the help, and then Logan leads her into a small room. He pulls out a chair for her to sit in. Furim takes a seat and watches him move around the room. He notices she's still on edge and kindly tells her to just sit back and relax. Furim notices the thick metal collar locked around Logan's neck and the scar on his face. It's a pretty heavy sight, and she realizes right then that he's a slave just like everyone else in this place. She thinks about how she's only here because the boss sent her, which technically means she's Logan's superior. Because of that, he isn't even allowed to talk to her like a normal person. It really sinks in that their relationship isn't equal at all. It's just how things work here. So Furim just sits there in silence for a moment, looking down at the floor until she suddenly bursts into tears. Logan sees her face and completely freezes up. He starts panicking, asking if she's okay and apologizing like crazy because he thinks he messed up. He begs her to stop crying, but she can't help it. The tears just won't stop falling, leaving Furim wiping her eyes and feeling terrible for causing such a scene so quickly. Furim wipes her eyes as the reality of everything hits her. The whole situation just makes her feel incredibly sad. And she realizes she shouldn't even be crying like this in front of people. So she tries to pull herself together and apologizes through her tears. Logan just lets out a huge sigh of relief once she starts calming down. But then Furim looks up and tells him she has a favor to ask. She asked him to please teach her exactly how things work around the place. Furim heads off down the hallway on her own, determined to get things moving. As she walks, she can't stop thinking about how the conditions at the gambling den were absolutely terrible. It was nothing but violence, zero sanitation, starvation, and disease everywhere. It's messed up that this kind of stuff is just the norm here. But she knows she has a way to help them now. It might not be much, but she's got a chance to save them. Furim is haunted by the fact that while she's sitting around hesitating, people are dying one after another. She stands outside a door, worried that even someone as kind as Logan could be gone at any moment. She grits her teeth, telling herself that she absolutely can't just stand by and watch it happen. She heads back to Dugga, who notices her look and asks if she's finally thought of something. Furim walks toward him, thinking about how there really is something she can do, and gives him a firm yes. She tells him she's got a plan and that she's going to save as many lives as possible. She realizes that combining her magic with what she knows from her past life is more than enough to work with. Her plan is to pitch a gambling idea that's new and reliable, but mostly she wants something that can actually make life a bit better for all the slaves living there. In the end, she goes ahead and proposes a total mess of an idea that doesn't even fix the real problem. Furim finishes explaining the whole situation to Dugga, bringing the core of the issue straight to the boss. Dugga stands there thinking, saying that a kid's imagination is really something else entirely. He looks pretty pleased with how things are going and mentions the new bet is getting popular. He realizes they never really had a flashy fight where guys just used their fists to build up hype. Furim explains that she suggested a boxing-style duel and tells him she's just glad to help. She figures that by adding real rules, people will actually enjoy the sport of gambling itself. She admits she doesn't know the exact rules from her old life, so it's really just a rough idea. Dugga doesn't mind, saying it's better than slaves dying too easily and tells her she did a great job. Furim thanks him but adds that she also wants to clean the place up so the slaves can live better. Dugga is confused, but Furim explains that people stay longer when a place is clean, mostly because the den smelled pretty bad before. Dugga thinks about it for a second and says he was actually wondering about that anyway, so this might work out perfectly. He looks at Furim and asks if slaves even really need to have good living conditions in the first place, and Furim starts waving her hands around, explaining that healthy and strong slaves are way easier to sell to people. She clenches her fist and tells him there's another reason too. She says that at the end of the day, it's just not fun for the crowd to watch two weak losers fight each other. Dugga stares at her for a long moment before finally saying he gets it. He decides to leave the cleaning to her whenever she has free time, and Furim is just stoked to get the green light. She knows this proposal is still going to end up hurting people since it's not a fight to the death with weapons, but it's still dangerous for the guys in the ring. Even so, she just hopes this makes everyone's lives in the den at least a little bit better than they were before. Dugga casually mentions that if any slaves give her trouble while she's cleaning, he doesn't mind if she just kills them, but Furim isn't having it. She yells no and explains she won't do that, mostly because losing their numbers would be a huge problem for the group's business, so Dugga just looks back at her and asks if that's really how she feels. He shrugs it off and says that's fine then, but Furim starts to say something else looking down. She thinks about how the idea of people dying is just plain scary to her. Dugga catches her muttering and asks if she said something, but she puts on a smile and quickly tells him it was nothing, leaving him to change the subject. He tells her he actually has something to give her and asks her to stop by his place later on, and once they're there, he pulls out this big, heavy book tied up with leather straps. Furim takes it from him and asks what this is supposed to be, standing there in the middle of the room while Dugga explains it's her reward. He tells her she's free to read it or even copy it down for herself. Dugga explains that the book is supposed to be a water grimoire, though he's not really sure if it's actually worth anything. But he figures it's better to let someone who can read look it over before they try to sell it. Furim looks down at the gift and says she sees, clutching the heavy book to her chest while she politely thanks him for the reward. As she opens it up, she starts sweating. The writing is definitely different from what she knows, but strangely, she can read every word. She remembers that the original kid, Flim, used to be really into studying before her past life memories took over. But then she stops herself standing there in the room. She tries to figure out where exactly she would have even learned to read a book like this. And just thinking about it makes her head start throbbing with a sharp pain. Suddenly, Kedin and Morga start complaining from the table, yelling that it's not fair and they want a prize too. So Dugga snaps at them to shut their mouths. He tells the guys they should try learning a thing or two so they can actually make some money for once, leaving the guys to just grumble and click their tongues while Furim heads out. Furim's head is absolutely killing her as she groans from the sharp pain. So she just lays back on her bed and holds the glowing book up, thinking about how much detail this thing actually has on water magic. She sits there trying to process it all, but it's a lot to take in. Reading about how manifesting mana drains your internal power and can be super dangerous if you don't trust your senses. The book goes on about how dragons and spirits affect the land, and how wind glows whenever spirits are nearby, which just makes Furim feel even more overwhelmed by how thick and complicated the writing is. She sits on the edge of the bed admitting to herself that she doesn't really get it, but she keeps reading about how magic comes from spirits drifting through the world, and how humans can only use that power when the spirits take a bit of their internal mana to make it happen. Furim realizes she can do simple stuff using just her own magic reserves, as long as she has the right skills for it, so she focuses on the fact that having a clear mental image is the most important part of the whole process. She stands there for a second with her arms crossed, just trying to get her head in the right space. Then she calls out for the water to take form, and right away the liquid starts splashing and swirling around between her hands like it's alive. The water keeps shifting until it hardens into a solid, sharp little needle, and Furim just stares at it, completely shocked that her magic actually worked. She starts thinking about how water is just H2O and essential for life, but realizes she can't really use those complex thoughts for magic yet, which leaves her standing there wondering if a tiny water needle is even useful for anything at all. Suddenly it clicks, and she decides that what she really needs to focus on right now is just getting the place cleaned up. Furim focuses all her energy and yells for the water to change, turning it into alkaline electrolyzed water and forcing it out into the air where it just floats there in a strange, shimmering blob above her hand. She stares at the liquid with a skeptical look, thinking it's impossible to tell if it worked since it looks just like regular water. So she starts walking away, wondering if her magic can basically create anything made of hydrogen and oxygen. She gets a wild idea and points her finger, jokingly commanding Othri to show up next. Furim laughs it off for a second, telling herself there's no way she'd actually try something that chemical, but then she stops dead in her tracks when a sharp, fishy smell starts filling up the room. Her face goes pale as she realizes she actually made ozone, and she starts gasping for air in a total panic. She covers her face and takes off at a full sprint to get away from the toxic fumes, and once she's far enough, she drops to her knees and starts coughing her lungs out from the mistake. Furim is totally out of breath, sweating like crazy after her little accident, and she looks completely spooked by how easy it was to make something so dangerous, saying it just kind of came out. She thinks about how ozone is usually made by machines to get rid of smells, but she never actually expected she could just summon the stuff using magic like that. She remembers hearing that ozone can be toxic, which makes her wonder if she was just in some serious danger, and she puts a hand over her heart while thinking about how it won't stop pounding. She decides she needs to go get some food to calm her nerves and clear her head, so she heads to the dining area where the guys are just hanging out together. Dugga asks her what's up, and she just looks exhausted while telling him she's hungry. Dugga gives her a serious look and tells her to go ahead and eat whatever she wants. Furim gives a tired nod and confirms she's ready to eat. She's definitely feeling a lot more comfortable around the boss now as she sits there grabbing a quick snack. Dugga looks over at her. Furim mentions that she actually figured out how to use a new magic spell. The boss is pretty shocked she learned it that fast, so he asks her what kind of magic it actually is. But Furim gets this super serious look on her face and asks if the stuff she made is actually poison. Dugga just stares back at her. He sounds pretty confused while repeating the word poison back to her. Furim remembers that Dugga almost died from getting poisoned once, so she knows she has to explain this part really carefully. She tells him it's mostly a spell for getting rid of bad smells and cleaning up the air, but Dugga's still trying to wrap his head around it, asking if she means it's the smell of poison. Furim starts waving her hands around like crazy. She tries to play it off by saying maybe it's just a poison spirit that clears out the bad air for them. Furim gets all hyped up and yells that's exactly how her magic works, practically begging for some praise, and Dugga just goes along with it. He admits he doesn't really get it but tells her she did a good job. Furim realizes her explanation was pretty weird since she couldn't use a technical term like ozone, so she stammers a bit, suggesting they use the magic together next time and tells him to keep it in mind. She grabs his arm and promises that with this, the chances of him getting hit by poison gas will finally drop. Dugga looks down at her for a second and starts reaching his hand out toward her. Furim starts sweating a little, wondering if she maybe went a bit too far with the sucking up. But then Dugga just puts his hand on her head and gives her hair a big, messy rub like he's proud of her. He looks at her with a serious face and tells her she's actually a really good subordinate. He finishes by telling her to keep up the good work while his hand stays right there on her head. Dugga looks pretty stressed and asks if that nasty smell is actually poison, so Furim just nods and admits it probably is. Dugga goes quiet for a second. He's clearly thinking hard about what to do next. He suddenly gets this intense look in his eyes and says it's time to clean up, which totally catches Furim off guard. He grips the table hard and says he knows he promised to leave the management to her, but he can't just let this slide. He stands up and starts yelling that they're closing the whole gambling parlor down right now to do a massive deep clean. Dugga starts kicking his subordinates toward the back, shouting at everyone to get to work and help out with the scrubbing. Furim stands there watching the chaos, thinking to herself how things just took a really strange turn, but she quickly realizes this is actually a perfect chance for her to get things done, so she gets hyped about it. The whole crew gets to work scrubbing every inch of the building. It's a total mess of water and soap everywhere. Dugga isn't making it easy though. He leans on his mop and screams that their work is pathetic and they have to redo everything. Logan and the rest of the guys are going all out with the cleaning, but Kedin is already looking like he's about to hit his limit. Dugga isn't letting up for a second, standing right in the middle of the mess and screaming at everyone to keep it moving. The chaos continues in the background while Dugga takes a second to lean over and check in with Furim. She looks up from her notes and tells the boss she's finished with her report, pointing out that the slave quarters are just to the left. Dugga gives her a serious look and says he's trusting her to handle that side of things on her own. Furim gets a bit nervous and asks if Logan can come with her, since she's worried people will just ignore a little kid like her. Dugga doesn't seem to care and tells her to just do whatever she wants, which honestly leaves Furim a little surprised. She starts walking away, realizing there's no way they're going to get this entire place cleaned up before the day is over. As she heads out, she can't stop thinking about how the boss was acting totally wild back there, but she eventually just chalks it up to that poison being way more painful than she first thought. Furim starts heading over to the slave quarters to get things moving. She knows that since the boss gave the green light, she can basically do whatever she wants with the place, so she finds Logan and gives him a deep bow, telling the guy she's really counting on his help with this. Logan looks pretty uncomfortable with the respect and tells her she definitely doesn't need to be bowing to him. But Furim isn't having it and insists it's totally fine, especially since she needs him to help manage everyone. Logan says he gets it, but he still warns her that slaves can be unpredictable and dangerous. He tells her she needs to be super careful around them, which makes her a little nervous. They head inside and she has to stand on a wooden crate just so the crowd can actually see her. She takes a deep breath and yells out to everyone that the first thing they're doing is taking a bath, but Logan looks completely floored by the idea and asks if she's actually serious. She just says the boss told her she's in charge. Furim decides it's time to get started right away. She figures the first thing they need to do is fill up the big wooden tub with water, so she starts spraying water from her hands like a hose. While she's doing it, she starts thinking about how much better it would be if the water was actually hot. She stops for a second and wonders. She starts questioning if her magic can actually change the water's temperature on the fly. She pumps her fist and gets herself hyped up. She's ready to give it a shot and see what happens next. Furim reaches her hand out toward the tub and yells for hot water to come out. She's putting everything she's got into the command, and suddenly steam starts pouring out of the tub. The water is definitely hot now. She's totally stoked that it actually worked. She leans in and cheers because the water came out perfectly warm. But she looks a little closer and starts to feel a bit weird. Something about using that much magic is starting to hit her all at once. Logan sees her start to wobble and freaks out. He yells for her and wonders what the heck just happened to make her look so drained. He looks pretty serious as he realizes that the magic she just used was way more than enough. It's clear she overdid it without even realizing how much power she was putting out. A blurry memory of a hug flashes through her mind, and a voice recognizes her as someone from a time long ago, leading into Furimu running toward a boy holding a ball, crying out about how glad she is that he's actually alive. The boy looks her in the eyes and asks why she saved him, a question that leaves her feeling completely shaken until she reaches out with a look of pure panic on her face, like she's trying to grab onto something that's slipping away. It turns out that was the very last thing she remembers before being reborn. She sits up in bed, realizing it was all just a dream. Dugga is standing right over her, looking pretty concerned as he asks if she's doing okay. She looks toward the doorway and sees the boss standing there. She can barely get his name out as she wakes up. She explains that she just ended up passing out while she was in the middle of practicing some new magic. As she sits there, she thinks about how having the boss be the first thing she sees upon waking is way too intense, but Dugga just sighs and mentions that Logan was totally freaking out. He tells her to stay out of trouble for a while, and she promises she will. Furim looks up at the boss and tries to play it cool, telling him she just fell asleep on her own. She quickly adds that he shouldn't punish any of the slaves for what happened, hoping to keep them out of trouble. So Dugga just scratches his head and gives in, telling her to stay in her room and rest until tomorrow. He walks out looking pretty done with the situation, leaving Furim sitting there in total silence. She stares down at the bed covers, still struggling to believe she actually passed out like that. And then she looks at the magic water in her hands, realizing she definitely needs a better spot to test out new stuff. A big glob of water floats right in front of her face as she checks it out, leading to her flopping back onto the bed in frustration, because ice magic just won't work for her yet. She pokes at the floating water, thinking about how hot water comes out fine and wondering what the trick is. She wonders if she's just picturing it wrong or if she just needs to get used to the feeling. Furim holds her head in frustration, thinking about how she still doesn't get why her magic isn't working, and soon she just lets out a tired groan and starts drifting off to sleep again. Later on, she wakes up and realizes she passed out for a second time. She figures she must have just been exhausted, but then she spots something nearby that makes her stop. So she looks over at some food and realizes it's the same meal the boss always eats, wondering how it even got there. She starts thinking maybe the boss brought it himself, but then tries to tell herself there's no way that happened. Moving on, she finds Logan and Bose as low as she can, apologizing for making him worry so much, while Logan asks if she's actually feeling better, telling her it really freaked him out when she suddenly dropped like that. Furim gives him a big smile and says she's totally fine now, acting all hyped to get back to cleaning, which leads to Logan just telling her to be really careful this time so it doesn't happen again. Logan tells Furim they're definitely thankful she saved them, but there's more to the situation than just that. And he grips her arm while explaining that if anything happens to her, the rest of them are pretty much finished. He holds her hands gently and asks her to please start taking better care of herself. But then his face goes totally serious as he warns her that if she collapses again, their heads are literally going to roll. Furim starts sweating and panicking, promising she'll be extra careful from now on and saying how sorry she is. So Logan tells her they should just pull it together and get back to their cleaning shift. They get right back to work, scrubbing and mopping the floors in the hallway, and soon Logan stops and asks if she's doing okay, noticing she's just been letting the water run for a long time. Furim looks pretty proud of herself and tells him she can actually make as much water as he needs, as long as it doesn't have to be hot, which completely blows Logan away, and he asks if she's already gone and made a contract with a spirit. Logan is completely stunned, but Furim just explains that even if it's not a contract, she can use as much water as she wants for some reason. So the whole crew gets back to work, scrubbing tables and mopping every inch of the room until everything is clean. Furim finally finishes her tasks and wipes the sweat off her face, saying they did a good job and tells Logan that they should probably just call it a day for now. She manages to get a hot bath ready, but she mentions there's only one, so she tells them that Logan and the people who work the hardest should go ahead and use it first. Logan is really grateful and thanks her, but Furim is secretly crying inside because she hasn't had a bath since she got to this world, and besides her being nice, she realizes there's another reason she's feeling a bit pressured. One of the workers with a slave collar is just standing there, looking back at her with a total attitude. Furim starts getting really uncomfortable and notices this random guy is just straight up glaring at her for no reason. Logan is busy moving a massive stack of books across the room, while Furim stands nearby just taking everything in. Logan stops for a second to ask how her magic practice is actually going, and she looks up from her book to let him know it's all good. He tells her he gets it and says she's totally fine to keep practicing as much as she wants. So Furim thanks him a bunch and decides to take him up on the offer, asking if she can go practice while she handles the cleaning. Logan is a bit surprised by her energy, but Furim is already in the background cheering because she's so hyped, and she heads up to a secluded spot on top of the stone walls to get some privacy for her training. Looking around the empty rooftop, she figures that nobody is really going to bother her up there. She checks the area and looks way down at the ground below, making sure the coast is clear before getting super excited and pointing out that it's the perfect spot since no one is passing by. She starts things off with a small spark, planning to practice using her magic on oxygen and hydrogen this time around. Furim figures that since she could make ozone, she should be able to control things made of water, so she remembers the basic fact that fire needs oxygen to keep burning. She looks over at the campfire, thinking this is the best way to see her magic working in real time. Starting the test, she holds out her hands and tries to get just a tiny bit of oxygen to come out, but the fire just stays the same, crackling away without any noticeable change. She crosses her arms and wonders if the problem is just that she didn't release enough oxygen yet. This time she tries to release a little bit of both oxygen and hydrogen at once, But even with her focused commands for the gases to appear, nothing is happening, leading to Furim falling over and shouting that it's just not working at all. She takes a second to think, wondering if the distance is the issue and the wind is just blowing her magic away. Furim thinks about whether the ratio of oxygen to hydrogen is the real secret here. It's something she remembers seeing in rocket research back in her old life, but she's still too scared to get close to the fire with explosive gases. She sits down on the dirt and decides to just try something else, so she calls out for the water to take form. Her plan is to keep a water barrier up for safety while she tries to hold a rod made of water and oxygen in her right hand. It's her first time using multiple spells at once. She's barely holding it together when the water suddenly shifts, making her completely lose control. Furim stands there in total silence, just staring down at the puddle on the ground. She looks pretty bummed out and admits to herself that this magic stuff is way harder than it looks, but she isn't giving up yet. She tells herself that she can definitely nail this if she just puts in enough practice. Right now, simple shapes are easy for her. It's the complex ones that are still the problem. Furim focuses on the small shapes she made out of water, watching a butterfly and some swirls float right in front of her. She looks a bit drained and realizes that creating these simple forms is pretty much her limit for now, so she just stays there on the floor, quietly watching as the little water butterfly starts to drift away. Without thinking, Furim starts crawling across the tiles, reaching out as she tries to keep up with the floating water shape. She suddenly stops and turns red, realizing she was actually chasing after something she created herself. The realization is too much, and she faceplants into the ground while shouting about how embarrassing the whole thing is. Later, she sits by the campfire to calm down and tells herself she needs to pull it together since she has to head back soon. Furim is still way too scared to get close to the flames, but she pumps herself up because she knows her theory is right. She looks down at the ground and starts piecing it together, thinking that if the oxygen gas is just getting blown away by the surrounding wind, then she just needs to find a way to keep it from moving so she can finally make it work. Furim puts everything she's got into her magic, yelling for the oxygen and hydrogen water to come out extra large. She watches the blob of water float right in front of her and realizes she actually pulled it off. She carefully lines up her shot, telling herself that she's aiming the water right at the wooden stick. With a quick motion, she shouts that she's throwing it and sends the water flying forward, and it streaks through the air like a rocket, moving way faster than she probably expected. The water hits the target with a massive crash. Furim can't even believe how much power she just put out. She stands there totally stunned while a huge cloud of smoke fills the air where the stick used to be. The stick clatters onto the ground in the alleyway, and she realizes she has to head down there to get it. But a crowd is already starting to gather in the street, which catches the eye of a suspicious guy nearby. Furim starts sweating when she sees a man holding up a drawing. He points right at the face on the paper and tells everyone that this is the enemy they're looking for. One of the thugs outside spots the stick Furim dropped and realizes a rival mafia is nearby. He yells that something fell and notices it looks just like the drawing. Down in the street, everyone starts panicking about a possible ambush while Furim hides behind some crates, realizing she really messed up. The guys outside start screaming at Lucas, demanding to know what he's doing there. Furim just cowers and covers her mouth to stay quiet. One of Dugga's men sounds off, worried that their location might have been leaked to the rivals. The thugs call out to each other to charge in and teach the rivals a lesson, making Furim realize this whole thing is turning into a total disaster. She knows she has to tell the boss what's going on, so she starts sneaking across the floor as fast as she can. Furim runs through the building until she finally spots Dugga and calls out to him. She tries to tell him there's a massive brawl starting outside, but Dugga just cuts her off and says he's already aware of it. He looks her right in the eye and tells her to go find somewhere safe to hide until things settle down. The other guys tell her to just go play in her room and wait, promising that the whole fight will be over before she knows it. Furim stands there looking pretty tense after the conversation with Dugga. She's clearly hiding out in the corner of a room, trying to stay out of the way while things go down. She thinks to herself that it might actually be a good thing she stopped the attack, but she's still totally spiraling. She's terrified of what would happen if anyone found out she can use explosion magic, and her mind goes to the worst-case scenario where people realize her pet hamster has that kind of power. She starts freaking out that he'll be snatched away and just used as a weapon. But then the guys come through the door bragging about how they won and really taught Lucas a lesson. Kedin asks if this is where she's been hiding, so she offers him some water and tells them they did a great job. Kedin just laughs and says he really wanted her to be out there to see their heroic deeds firsthand. The other guys start joking around too, bragging about who took down the most people in the fight. The room is loud with the guys shouting and acting tough, but Dugga ignores the noise to ask Furim if she's doing okay or if she got hurt during the chaos. She just nods and gives a shaky answer, trying to play it cool while Dugga stares her down, mentioning how she was supposed to be out practicing magic but clearly got mixed up in something else. He looks like he's onto her, so Furim starts sweating and nervously asks what he means, her heart racing as she waits for him to call her out. She's totally cornered until Dugga just goes quiet for a second. He looks her right in the eyes and then simply says no, and he turns away while telling her it's actually nothing at all. Furim stands there looking confused, but she's mostly just relieved that the boss didn't keep digging for more info. She wonders if he actually saw something out there, but figures as long as he isn't asking questions, she's in the clear. Still, she can't stop worrying about what might happen if the truth ever comes out. She starts walking away, thinking that if he knew she had attack magic, he'd probably force her to go on dangerous raids. The thought of being used like a weapon makes her jump, and she realizes that whole scenario would be a total disaster for her. It's a scary thought, but she makes a mental note to just keep her mouth shut and never mention the magic again. She quickly excuses herself and heads out before anyone can ask anything else. Furim makes a run for it, slamming the door behind her as she escapes down the hall. Dugga just watches her go, and he stands there with a small, knowing smile like he's got it all figured out. Later on, Furim is back at the hideout getting some actual work done. Logan is nearby keeping an eye on things while everyone else hauls crates around the room. Furim finally finishes her task, letting out a sigh and saying they're officially done when Logan walks up to her. He calls her Lady Furim and lets her know he's finished organizing his section, so she gives him a big smile and tells him he's always a huge help. Logan acts all humble about it and says it's no big deal, explaining that since he used to be a soldier, doing manual labor is really the only way he can be useful these days. Furim panics a bit inside, thinking there's no way she could handle leading everyone alone. She quickly tells him she's definitely going to be counting on him again. Logan says his goodbyes and heads off, leaving Furim thinking about how he's actually such a nice guy. She even imagines him living a quiet life, thinking a cafe and a dog would suit him perfectly. The cleaning finally wraps up at the hideout, and Furim heads out feeling pretty good, thinking she just has to finish up some accounting at the boss's place. Once she gets there, Dugga calls her over and drops some big news. He's planning to introduce her to a noble. Furim completely freezes up, looking worried since she wasn't expecting to deal with anyone high class. So Dugga tries to calm her down, saying the guy is just an acquaintance and there's no reason to be so stiff. Right then, a knock at the door interrupts them. Dugga welcomes the visitor back and tells them to come inside. The man walks in and notices right away how much better the place looks since he was last there, and Dugga mentions the casino is doing well too, but then he notices Furim acting weird and asks what she's doing. Furim is literally face down on the floor in a full prostration, making things awkward for everyone. She stays glued to the ground, explaining that she heard you aren't even allowed to look at a noble's face without permission. Dugga tells Furim to quit worrying and picks her up by her shirt like a kitten, explaining that while the noble looks scary, he's actually a decent guy. Furim can only let out a shocked yelp as she's held up right in front of the visitor, who just stands there with his arms crossed and a pretty confident smirk on his face. He looks exactly like Dugga, and the resemblance is so strong that Furim can't help but shout for her boss in total confusion. The man just gives a little laugh, clearly enjoying how much he's freaking her out. Then Dugga yells at him for not saying anything sooner, but the guy just laughs harder and says he figured Dugga hadn't explained the situation yet. Furim is just standing there completely lost, her brain basically short-circuiting as she tries to make sense of why there are two of them. The visitor finally decides to be formal and introduces himself as Berser Duregan. He stays totally calm while Furim looks back and forth between them, and he points out that it should be pretty obvious that he and Dugga are brothers. He goes on to say they're actually identical twins, which is why they look so similar, and that's the final straw that sends Furim into a full-blown panic. Furim tries to pull herself together and introduces herself, but she can't stop staring, mumbling about how the two of them look way too much alike. Berser starts laughing, realizing he totally called it. He tells Dugga he knew they swapped places while they were counting money the other day, and Furim can't even believe what she's hearing, yelling out in shock while Berser just keeps laughing at the whole situation. He reaches over and starts patting Furim's head, telling his brother that this kid is actually the best while she just stands there looking completely dazed. Dugga just smiles at his brother's antics, telling him he's being pretty terrible about the whole thing, even if he totally gets why it's funny. After everyone calms down a bit, Berser kneels down to get on her level and calls her name to get her attention because he's got a real question for her. He looks her in the eye and asks if she wants to try working for his brother for a bit. Furim just stands there with her mouth hanging open, completely caught off guard by the random job offer. The three of them end up sitting down at a table together to actually talk through the details. Berser explains that the actual job is just washing the dragon family statue, and Furim sounds pretty confused as she repeats the weird request back to him. He tells her that scrubbing it with a brush won't do anything for the dirt, so he just wants her to blast the whole thing with her water magic, leaving Furim thinking the guy is way too careless with his family stuff. Furim is internally panicking, thinking that if she even scratches a noble's statue, her life is basically over. She gets so nervous she actually stutters while asking if she can speak, but Berser just laughs and tells her to go for it. She explains that using high-pressure water inside is a bad idea because dirt will fly everywhere, and Berser just nods along while she adds another warning, that depending on how sturdy the statue is, her magic might actually snap it in half. She holds her hands up and makes it clear she isn't taking any responsibility if the thing breaks or gets even filthier, which Berser finds hilarious. He laughs it off and gives her the green light anyway, leaving a teary-eyed Furim promising to do her best. The group settles in with some drinks on the table to talk things over more seriously. Someone takes a long drink from their mug as the conversation shifts to the family's status, and Berser starts explaining the family tree, saying his brother Berser is a high-ranking noble in charge of managing the entire district. He mentions that even though his brother doesn't technically own the land, he's still way up there in the noble ranks. Furim processes the info about Berser's brother being a high-ranking noble and asks if that basically makes him the mayor. But Berser gets real for a second and explains they were born into a noble family that thought twins were a curse, so he got kicked out. He adds that despite the family drama, he and his brother stayed cool, and eventually he ended up running things in the slums. Furim thinks his life story is actually pretty amazing, though Berser just shrugs it off like it's not a big deal. She can't help but ask the obvious question, why was he the one who had to leave instead of his brother? Furim keeps digging, pointing out that since they're twins, they must have looked exactly the same back then. Berser just gives her a blank look, which makes Furim instantly regret opening her mouth and asking something so personal. She starts shaking and stammers out a quick apology, looking like she's about to cry because she thinks she messed up, but Berser just takes a long drink and tells her to chill out because he's not actually mad about it. Moving on, he mentions that his brother can use earth magic and explains their family has been making bricks for the capital for ages. Berser looks down, admitting that he simply didn't have the right talent for the family's magic style, but Furim isn't having it and quickly tells him that he's got plenty of other great qualities as a boss. He agrees and explains that he can use physical enhancement magic, which is enough to move up in this world if you're skilled, and it's even helped him make a decent amount of money along the way. He gestures with his hand, adding that there's more to it because now he's also got a group of really good subordinates working under him. Furim just stares at him for a second, taking in everything he just said, until Berser offers her a drink and tells her to get some down, which she happily accepts despite someone wondering if a kid should be drinking. As soon as she takes a sip, she starts coughing her lungs out while Berser asks if she's doing all right. Furim ends up looking completely out of it, looking totally exhausted from that one drink. Berser looks down at the kid and asks if she's doing okay, but Furim says her head is spinning, so he tells her to go throw up and apologizes for the drink. He decides he can't let her go off on her own in that state and says he'll have Logan and Almuroy go with her. One of the guys coming along is standing right there, a young guy with a slave collar and a really serious look on his face. He just stares off to the side with those sharp eyes, looking pretty intense, and it makes Furim remember how he was glaring at her the last time they saw each other. She also thinks back to a different combat slave, one that looked like a weird cross between a lizardman and a person. Moving on, Berser introduces the last person joining the little group, as the camera pans over to show who it is, revealing that the final person coming along to help is Pakis. Furim is just staring blankly with her eyes wide open, totally sweating, and Berser tells Pakis he better listen to whatever Furim says. But when the kid just gives a quiet answer, Berser laughs and says he looks pretty annoyed about it. Logan speaks up and asks if he can say something, which makes Berser turn around and ask him what's on his mind. He explains that since they're going to be cleaning, they're definitely going to hit some spots where only women are allowed to go. Since the guys won't be able to stay by Furim's side the whole time, Logan says it's necessary to bring some women along, and Berser admits that's a really good point, so Berser tells him to go ahead and pick out 2 people to join the group. Furim is actually really relieved and thanks Logan for being so thoughtful. As Logan starts carrying Furim away, Pakis follows behind looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, and suddenly he glares back at her, telling her not to get ahead of herself and basically just to drop dead. Furim watches from Logan's shoulder as Pakis walks ahead. His hand is already moving toward the knife at his waist, and she starts panicking, wondering what's wrong with her old boss and wishing he'd just stop reaching for his weapon. Logan suggests to Furim that they should bring along a combat slave named Markia, explaining that even though she's a little rough around the edges, she's a really hard worker. Since they need 2 people, Logan asks what they should do about picking the second person, and he takes a second to think about who would actually be a good fit for the job. Logan turns to Almuroid and asks if anyone has a specific recommendation for the group, and Almuroid brings up a girl named Terrarine, mentioning that she's actually his little sister. He casually explains that since they haven't debuted yet, there should be someone available. But Furim is totally shocked because he just said something so heavy like it was no big deal. The first girl shows up with a huge grin and sharp teeth, introducing herself as Markia, while the second girl, Terrarine, introduces herself more quietly and asks them to look after her. Markia steps up and gives everyone a loud greeting. She looks totally ready to go, but Terrarine turns around to look at Almuroid, and for a second, things get pretty quiet between them. She looks up at him with a big smile and asks if it's really her big brother, but he just stares back with a completely blank look on his face, not saying a single word to her. Logan breaks the silence by telling Terrarine it's time to start working and orders her to follow him. She looks pretty down about it. Her eyes go soft as she quietly says, "Yes, sir." Furim watches her walk away and can tell something is definitely bothering the girl, but soon they arrive at a huge mansion where a big guy in expensive-looking clothes is waiting outside. He throws his arms out wide and gives Furim a warm welcome as Logan leads her toward the house. Furim puts on a bright, happy face and tells him she's excited to start working together. The tall man laughs and rubs the kid's head, shouting that they finally made it all the way to Pakis, while he keeps the energy up by telling the whole group it's great to have them there, though Pakis doesn't look too thrilled about the head rub and just gives a real short greeting back. The man looks up at the massive stone figures standing over them and remarks that there are quite a lot of them, explaining that the 6 statues are actually modeled after the different nobles of the country, and Furim takes a look at the work ahead and mentions how filthy they are. She even warns him she won't be responsible if the damaged stone breaks from her magic. The man just winks and says he doesn't mind because he's just hoping for a miracle, pointing out a specific statue for her to start on and telling her it's totally fine if it just falls apart, which leaves Furim thinking to herself if things are ever really okay to just break like that. She starts rolling up her sleeves and asks the man to step back since water is about to spray everywhere. Berser lets out a shout of surprise as Furim starts her work. She lets a massive burst of magic hit the base of the statue, making the nobleman hum in approval while he watches her handle the power. Furim keeps her focus locked on the stone, but she eventually gives him such a scary look that he completely loses his cool. He tells her to stop glaring like that and promises he'll just watch from the mansion, even though he was really hoping to stay and see her magic from up close. With the noble out of the way, Furim tells the group it's time to split up and get to work, but then she notices everyone is just standing there staring at her. The young maid looks on in total awe, thinking about how impressive Furim is for such a young kid, especially since she can boss around high-ranking nobles without breaking a sweat or looking scared at all. Furim gets a bit flustered by the praise and tries to act like she's just getting lucky, but she quickly gets her head back in the game and says she's going to start handing out the jobs. She tells Logan he's staying with her to help out, which earns her an annoyed look. Then she orders the rest of the crew to start cleaning up the surrounding area. Pakis walks up to Furim with a major attitude. He tells her she's acting way too high and mighty lately for someone giving him orders, and he completely loses his cool, getting right in her face and cursing under his breath. Furim just looks him in the eye without blinking. She mentions how she knew he wouldn't be able to hold back his temper for long, but she still tries to keep things professional by reminding him this is the job the boss ordered. Pakis isn't hearing it though, shouting that he doesn't give a damn about any of that. But before things can get physical, Logan jumps in and grabs Pakis's arm to keep him away from her. The maid watching from the side is totally freaked out, covering her mouth in shock as the tension between the crew members boils over. Pakis is caught completely off guard by the sudden intervention, looking back at the guy holding him with total confusion. Logan keeps his voice steady and cold, telling him that his current orders are to act as Lady Furim's personal guard, meaning he isn't letting go no matter how much Pakis struggles or yells at him to back off. Pakis is fuming now, demanding to know what Logan thinks he's doing while reaching for his blade to show he's not playing around. Pakis is totally losing his mind, screaming that Logan is a useless piece of trash and telling him to just die already, making Markia lean and close to Furim. She asks for permission to just knock the girl out so she doesn't have to see this mess, but Furim is just standing there shaking, quietly begging everyone to stop before things get even worse. Pakis keeps shouting that Logan is nothing but a slave who turned on his own people, but Furim tells Logan he absolutely cannot kill him. Logan finally drops him, and Pakis just lays there on the ground mumping about how he's going to kill Furim while Markia checks to see if she's alright. Furim looks completely pale, thinking to herself that this is way too harsh of a workplace for a little girl and that the future is looking pretty dark. Everyone just stands there in the alley for a second. The fight is over, but the vibe is totally ruined as Furim watches Markia and Logan, thinking that even though the situation is settled for the moment, She has a really bad feeling that a massive problem just showed up out of nowhere. Furim tells them to give her regards to the boss, but Logan just stands his ground. He says he isn't able to leave the area just yet. Logan tells Kedin to leave the rest of the situation to him, but Kedin just sighs and complains about how much of a pain this whole job has been. Furim turns to Almuroy and Tararine to thank them for stepping in and helping her out earlier, but as she says their names, Almuroy acts like it was no big deal at all, standing there with a totally calm look on his face. He casually mentions that his name is actually Almuroy. Furim completely loses it, realizing she's been getting it wrong this whole time. She starts blushing and sweating from the embarrassment, apologizing like crazy and admitting she's just terrible at remembering names, so she tries to shake off the awkward vibe by pumping her fists and telling everyone it's time to pull themselves together and get back to work. Furim starts blasting the dirty brick walls with her cleaning magic while the others start moving along to their own tasks. While she's working, she notices the regular household staff standing in the distance. She realizes they've been staring at her for a long time. She figures they probably can't look away because her magic is satisfying to watch, kind of like those cleaning videos she used to watch back in her old life in Japan. After a while, Furim cups her hands around her mouth and yells over to Almuroy and Tararine that it's finally time for them to take a break. Furim hands out some drinks to the sibling. Tararine is already laughing and having a good time, but Almuroy still looks completely drained from all the hard work they just did. The cups are filled to the brim with a cold drink, sloshing around as they get ready to finally take a seat and relax for a bit. Tararine looks down at her wooden mug, acting a little hesitant like she isn't sure what to expect from it, so she just goes for it and takes a huge gulp. She swallows it all down in one go and her eyes immediately light up. She's actually blushing because of how good it is, yelling out that the drink is delicious. She turns to Furim and gestures toward her brother, saying he needs to try some of this stuff too. Almuroy stands there looking like he hasn't slept in days. He stares into the mug with a blank look, then he finally gives in and takes a sip. He keeps his eyes closed while he tastes it, and his whole mood changes. He looks genuinely surprised and admits that it's actually really good. Tararine is in the background looking super hyped that he likes it. Furim watches them both, feeling pretty good about the fact that they're finally getting a second to breathe. Furim decides to give the siblings some space, telling them she's sure they have plenty to catch up on. She makes an excuse to leave, saying she just needs to head to the restroom for a moment. Tararine immediately jumps up, saying she's going to go with her, but Furim tells her to stay put. Someone needs to keep an eye on things, so she asks the girl to just wait there. As Furim walks away, she looks back to see the two of them finally starting to talk. Almuroy actually looks happy for once, smiling as he listens to his sister laugh. Furim takes it all in, glad she could give them this bit of peace together. Later that night at the big mansion, things have taken a pretty weird turn. Berser is chilling in a massive bath, talking about what a great soak it is while Furim stands in the corner looking completely annoyed. She's just sitting there on the steps, wondering why she's even stuck in the room watching Berser take a bath. Furim is standing there looking completely done with the situation. She complains that even though she can technically make hot water, this is definitely pushing it. She turns back toward the tub and snaps at Berser, asking if he really just sees her as his personal water heater at this point. Berser doesn't seem to mind the attitude and tells her that her magic water is amazing. He can feel the power soaking right into his core, so Furim just slumps down on the floor and gives a tired thanks, while Berser relaxes and asks her how her actual job is going. She reports that even with a few hiccups, things are moving along and she's already finished cleaning about 12 subjects. Berser says he's honestly surprised her mana hasn't run out yet. Moving on, Furim brings up a rumor she heard about Pakis throwing some kind of tantrum earlier today, which leads into her explaining how their roles have totally flipped, since Pakis used to be her superior in the past. She figures the kid is just bitter about having to work under her now, but Berser just laughs and says there's not much anyone can do about that. Berser tells her not to hold a grudge against the girl because the whole mess is really Dugga's fault, making Furim turn around and ask him what he actually means by that. He just looks away and shrugs it off, saying that on top of everything else, Pakis is just at that age where kids start acting out and being rebellious. Berser looks off to the side, sounding pretty sure of himself as he tells Furim that the girl definitely has her own reasons for acting out like this, implying there's a lot more going on under the surface. Furim just stands there looking totally drained, her eyes wide and blank as she processes everything he's saying. She's clearly hit her limit for the day. While he's relaxing, Berser asks if she can pour in a bit more hot water for him. Furim doesn't even argue, just giving a quick answer that she'll do it right away. And meanwhile, back in a small, messy room, Pakis is curled up on the floor all by himself. The place is a wreck with just a crate and a bucket nearby, making him look completely miserable as he lies there on the hard ground. He's staring at nothing, totally lost in his own head while he remembers his father, Dugga, looking down at him with this cold, judgmental face. Dugga basically destroyed him by asking if Pakis was even actually his son. The kid looked absolutely crushed in that moment, and those words still haunt him to this day. Even now, he can see his dad's face closing his eyes like he's just totally disappointed in him. Pakis knows his background is just a typical sad story. He was basically a mistake born from a night of drinking. It's the kind of thing that happens all the time, but it doesn't make it hurt any less. Growing up, his mother was always the one there for him, and she used to tell him that they didn't even need a father in their lives. Back then, Pakis was totally cool with that. Just a little kid helping his mom out around the house and doing what he could to get by. Pakis is looking pretty worried because his mom is coughing her lungs out. He asks her if she's just got a cold, but she tries to play it off with a weak smile, saying it's probably just a cold and she'll be fine after some rest. Pakis tells her not to push herself too hard, but the reality was that things weren't getting better at all. Later on, a huge shout rings out from behind a closed door as Pakis loses his temper with Dugga, yelling that since he's his father, he needs to step up and do something, but Dugga just sits there acting like it's not his problem. Dugga looks at him with total indifference, starting to explain that the whole situation is actually on Pakis' mother. He claims that Lackey's was the one who specifically told him she didn't want any of his money in the first place. Pakis tries to argue back, but Dugga just cuts him off, telling the kid that if he wants money so bad, he should go out and earn it himself. The kid just stands there in silence, looking completely broken after being rejected like that. He ends up running out into the pouring rain, swearing and cursing his life because he's got nowhere else to turn. Pakis is out in the pouring rain, absolutely losing it. He screams that he wants that bastard to just drop dead, so he stands there for a second catching his breath, just soaking wet and exhausted before he finally heads inside. Muttering to himself about how much everything sucks right now and walks over to check on his mom, she's just lying there in bed, looking really rough while she tries to sleep through the sickness, her face pale and her breathing sounding weak. Pakis stands by her side with his head down. His fist clenches up tight because he knows he's gotta do something, and to get the money for her medicine, he starts learning the ropes from his half-brothers, basically figuring out how to survive. They show him the reality of their world, starting with the most important thing, exactly how to make money. He spends his time sitting in back alleys learning about business rivals and how to handle them with fighting and scaring people, until it gets even more serious, eventually learning the cold truth on how to actually kill people. As time goes on, Pakis gets more responsibility and even gets his own subordinates to manage, starting with Furim, who looks like she's been through hell and is barely hanging on. Pakis looks down at her and just sees a timid, slow kid who's basically dead weight, so he decides to educate her the same brutal way he was raised, standing over her while she's curled up on the ground. But things take a weird turn when Pakis hears some news. He's shocked that Frim is actually going to work for his old man. One of the crew members tells him it's just tough luck because Dugga actually took a liking to the girl, which really gets under Pakis' skin. He's frustrated and angry about the whole situation, but he heads back home to sit by his mom's side, just watching over her while she rests. Lackey's wakes up for a second and tells him she's sorry for being so much trouble, but Pakis just smiles and tells her it's fine. He tells her to stop worrying and just get some more sleep. Lackey's asks Pakis if work is going okay, and he just sighs, complaining about how he's stuck with such a clumsy subordinate. His mom tells him that kind of thing just happens sometimes, so he should really treasure her, but he just brushes it off. She changes the subject, asking if Dugga is at least treating him well. The question hits hard. Pakis just clenches his fist into the bedsheets, holding back how he actually feels. He forces a smile for his mom and tells her of course, even though things are clearly rough. He starts thinking back to the reality of his life, remembering how for a long time he just failed at every single thing he tried, and he can't help but wonder where it all went wrong, especially when he tries to trace everything back to the source. Pakis sits there gritting his teeth, the frustration clearly starting to boil over as he realizes that everything really started going downhill the second Frim left. He stares at the ground, thinking about how he needs to make him understand the situation once and for all. Pakis is lying flat on the ground, thinking about how his plan to scare Furim was just his way of teaching him a lesson. Dugga grabs him by the collar as the kid tries to explain himself, claiming he only used the knife to make Furim listen again. Dugga isn't buying any of it, asking why he'd try to kill someone so useful to the business. But Pakis has finally reached his limit. Instead of answering, Pakis just stares him down and spits right in the boss's face. He calls Dugga a shitty old man while pinned to the floor, showing zero fear even though he's in deep trouble. The response is instant. A heavy blow catches Pakis right in the face, sending his head spinning. Dugga stands over him while he's coughing on the floor, mentioning how he hoped the kids would get along, but things went too far. The boss looks down with a cold stare, telling the kid he needs to start showing a little bit of remorse for what he did. Pakis ends up thrown into a wooden cage, just sitting there in the dark with nothing but his own silence. He lies there looking completely defeated, finally realizing that he really screwed everything up this time. The scene shifts to a quiet, high-end hallway filled with fancy doors and framed pictures on the walls. Furim is waiting around when Logan mentions that he and Markia are taking way longer than they should have, which starts making Furim feel pretty uneasy. She really thought they'd be back by now and starts getting in her own head. She starts panicking, wondering if Pakis actually lied to her. She even starts imagining the two of them getting punished instead. Furim clutches her head and loses it, wondering why she didn't think this whole plan through a lot better. But then Markia hears something and looks over, wondering what all the noise is about while Logan just stands there. Furim spots them and runs over, telling them how glad she is that they're both safe and sound. The two of them just stare back at her with blank expressions. Not really sure how to react to her sudden energy, Furim gets totally thrown off by their silence, asking why they're giving her such a weird look after she was so worried. Logan ends up laughing, apologizing for making her worry so much, and Furim just stands there, finally realizing everything is actually fine. Logan watches Furim and thinks to himself about how weird it is to see someone actually care about a slave, since he realizes he's never really come across anyone like her before in his life. Furim stands there in silence for a second, looking down while she tries to process everything. She finally tells them how worried she was since they were gone for so long, and then she perks up with a huge smile, suggesting that they should all go inside the room to talk. She's all giggles as she plays host, telling them to take a seat and make themselves comfortable. Logan tells her she's way too kind to slaves, but Furim suddenly jumps back when she notices someone is already in the bed, which completely catches her off guard. Everyone stops and stares as the blankets start shifting around on the mattress, and then Pakis finally sits up with a big smile on his face, casually saying it's time to get up. Furim has a sudden realization and remembers meeting this guy before. She recalls talking to him right at the staff entrance of the arena, so Mullard explains he just wanted to pull a little prank and surprise her by showing up instead of Pakis, while Pakis greets his brother since it's been a minute. Furim nods along, but she's secretly thinking about how often she's seen the two of them together. It makes her think they must be pretty close, and Mullard gives her a friendly smile, telling her she doesn't need to be so formal with him and should just use his name instead. He points out that she'll probably need to know it for work stuff anyway, but Furim starts panicking because she realizes she never actually bothered to learn his name in the first place. She just stands there stuttering, trying to find the right words. She finally confesses that she only ever heard Pakis call him Big Bro, so she was totally in the dark about what his actual name was. Mullard just laughs it off and says sorry for being difficult. He tells her his name is Mullard, but she can just call him Mude for short. Furim looks up at him while he decides to move the conversation along, and then he turns his attention toward Pakis with a curious look, asking why that girl was acting so angry earlier. Furim's face is covered in sweat. She's clearly panicking about how to answer Mullard. She starts worrying if she's about to get beat up, so she just stutters out a few sounds. She's basically seeing her life flash before her eyes. Mullard stands there with a dark look on his face, making Furim think they're in a serious pinch. The pressure is starting to get to her. She looks down, trying to keep it together while she realizes she doesn't actually feel any anger coming from him. But even so, she tells herself she better be ready for a punch depending on what she says next. It's a high-stakes moment, and she finally explains that Pakis used to be her boss back in the day, while Mullard just stands there with his hands on his hips. Furim clenches her hands and asks if he was just annoyed about being ordered to work under her instead. She's practically shaking as she says it. Mullard doesn't say anything at first, just keeping a calm smile on his face. The silence is heavy. He finally speaks up, saying he understands the situation now, but adds that the whole thing sounds like a complete disaster. Furim is caught off guard by his chill response. She asks him if that means he isn't actually mad about what Pakis did earlier. Furim looks down at the floor, feeling bad about the whole mess. She tells Mude she's sorry for causing him so much trouble. Mude just brushes it off with a smile and tells her it's totally fine. Besides, he knows the whole thing was Pakis' fault anyway. Since it's getting late, Mude suggests they should probably just head to bed. Furim gives a nervous reply and agrees. The group gets back to their room, but instead of using the big comfortable bed, Logan and the others just lie down on the hard floor. Furim looks at them like they're crazy and tells everyone they should definitely be sleeping in the actual beds, but Logan looks pretty uncomfortable with that idea. He says that sleeping the same way as Lord Mude would just be disrespectful. Furim doesn't buy that and reminds them that the people running the mansion were the ones who told them to sleep in this room, so she thinks it might actually be more rude if they don't use what they were given. To settle the debate once and for all, Furim turns to Mude and asks if he actually minds them using the beds. Mude just gives them a big, friendly smile and tells them it's really no big deal. He asks why they wouldn't just use the beds. Furim gives Mude a big smile and tells him thank you very much for letting the others use the beds. So the group finally settles in for the night as the candle light flickers and eventually dies down. As they lie there, Mude mentions that he knew it. He says she's even kind to slaves. Furim looks up from her blanket and explains that she's their superior, so it's only natural to take care of them since they're the boss's property, but she doesn't stop there. She looks over at Mude and adds one more thing, saying that even slaves are still human beings at the end of the day. Mude just closes his eyes with a peaceful smile on his face, looking like he's actually impressed. He simply replies that he sees, and the two of them finally start to drift off as they both wish each other a good night in the quiet room. Later on, Furim finds herself back outside with the group. She's trying to reach for someone while the apothecary lady holds her back. It's already been a few days since the group arrived at Lord Versal's massive mansion, and the cleaning is moving along so fast that Furim figures they'll probably be finished with everything by tomorrow. She watches Mude working hard and wonders if he's actually just a good guy, eventually thinking she just doesn't understand people here. While they're working, Barsel points to a statue and tells her she can just be half-hearted with that one, making Furim ask if that's really okay. Barsel gets a serious look on his face and explains that the people shown in the statues come from a family of stone magic users, and the main issue is that his family and theirs get along like total garbage. He even tells her she doesn't have to clean them and could just kick them for all he cares. Furim can only think about how petty he's being. Barsel crosses his arms and explains that every statue kept in the mansion represents a famous noble from this country. He goes on to say it's honestly just annoying that they aren't allowed to just tear the statues down and be done with it. So Furim looks at them and asks if these are the people who founded the nation, which Barsel confirms with a simple nod. Barsel continues the tour by explaining that while the statues might look like they're just scattered around, the actual arrangement of the figures shows where all their different territories are on the map. He points out that even the clothes they're wearing and the stuff they're holding have specific meanings, making Furim look up at him and ask if all of that really matters. Barsel just smiles and says the whole world is full of things that have a deeper meaning. Even the fact that a kid like her can use magic so well probably means something too. He even suggests that she might have some serious noble blood running through her veins. But Furim just reminds him she's from the slums and was abandoned by her family. She stops for a second, surprised she even used the word abandoned. Barsel asks why she'd say that, knowing that's exactly what was on her mind. Barsel reaches over and suddenly drops his hand right on top of Furim's head, which turns into him aggressively rubbing her hair until she yells that her head is totally spinning. He stops and looks at her pretty gently, saying it sounds like she's had a rough time lately, making Furim just freeze up and stare at him. She didn't expect him to be so nice about it. Barsel starts opening up about his own family, mentioning that he and his brother didn't get along with their father. He explains that while he ended up as the official successor, Dugga was the one who actually got kicked out. He tells her that everyone has their own mess to deal with, no matter who they are hearing. That makes Furim realize this world is pretty much just like her old one. Barsel gets hyped up again and points out some specific guys, telling her to memorize their faces since they're the water magic experts. Furim says she gets it, but she can't shake the feeling that she's seen those people somewhere before. Barsel is giving some pretty intense combat advice, telling the guys to make sure they twist the knife after stabbing someone, and he just keeps grinning while the others nervously agree to his brutal instruction. Later on, Barsel stands at the head of a massive table and announces he's prepared a huge feast to reward everyone's hard work, and he spreads his arms wide, shouting for everyone to eat until they're completely stuffed. Furim looks at him a bit worried and asks if he's really sure about all this, but Barsel just smiles and points out that everything is coming to an end tomorrow anyway. He explains that since he hasn't been able to give them decent meals before, he wants to make sure they're treated right today, which really gets to Furim, and she looks up at him while giving him a sincere thank you. Markia doesn't waste any time and yells for everyone to finally start eating. Tararine takes one bite of the food and looks like she's completely losing it because it tastes so amazing. Everyone is diving into the food, and Furim is basically losing her mind over how good everything tastes while Barsel suddenly remembers something and turns to Furim. He asks if she can get a ton of water ready for him because he's already starting to miss it, knowing he won't be able to drink her special water for a long time. Furim says she's on it and asks if she can borrow a jar or something to hold it all, then yells for them to bring it over. Barsel takes a big gulp and looks like he's in heaven, telling her that she seriously makes the absolute best water. The whole situation makes Furim feel like she's a gas station worker, and the excitement has her heart racing as she leans into the bit, tipping an imaginary hat and shouting that a full tank of water is coming right up. Barsel gets a bit more serious and points out that the magic power she puts into the water is totally different, and he starts wondering out loud if she actually comes from some super high-class family or something similar. But Furim just gets annoyed by the staring and tells him it's really hard to concentrate with him watching her so closely. Everything is sparkling, starting with the water in the basin which looks completely spotless, just like the stairs and railings that are shining so bright that Barsel can't help but shout in pure amazement at the transformation. Barsel yells that the work isn't bad at all, while Furim stands there sweating, thinking about how she never expected to have to clean this entire massive mansion. Barsel reaches out and presents a fancy, decorated black box, telling them it's time for their reward and mewed bows and thanks him while taking the box, which totally throws Furim off since she didn't expect him to be the one receiving it. She quickly realizes it actually makes a lot of sense, considering Mewed is the one acting as her chaperone for the trip. But then Barsel turns back to her and says he's got something special for her too, and he explains that he found a duplicate water magic book while they were clearing out the warehouse, so he decided to let her have it. Furim's eyes go wide as she snatches the book away, shouting that she's definitely taking it, leaving Barsel making a strained sound from the sudden grab. Barsel gives a warm smile and tells Furim to use the gift he gave her to polish herself, explaining that while cutting power is one thing, letting a sword get all rusty just looks bad. Furim wonders if that's some weird local slang she doesn't know, but she just tells him she'll do her best. She and Pakis bow politely as they say their goodbyes, heading out while Pakis asks if she's ready to head back to the gambling den, and she's totally down for it. The two of them start walking through a quiet, narrow alleyway between the tall buildings. As they walk, Furim looks around feeling a bit lost, wondering if they even came this way earlier. Pakis stops and calls her name, then asks if he can borrow that magic book she just got, which catches her off guard, but she agrees and starts handing the grimoire over to him. Pakis takes the book with a heavy, serious look on his face, making Furim feel pretty uneasy. Pakis looks down with a cold expression, telling Furim he's sorry but she should just look at this as a streak of bad luck as he suddenly pulls a knife on her. He keeps the blade steady, telling her that obviously she isn't going to say a single word about this to his father. Furim realizes he totally played them to take the reward for himself. She nervously points out she can't even talk unless someone talks to her first. Pakis says he already knew that, and he'll just take the heat for it later, but for now she needs to do what he says. Just as things get really tense, a tall, muscular woman suddenly steps in, calling out to a guy named Mewed and asking him what the hell he thinks he's doing. The vibe in the alley changes instantly as everyone freezes up. Pakis points the knife at Furim, telling her not to move or even open her mouth. It's a direct order. Furim is completely frozen, her eyes wide as she stares at the sharp blade right in front of her. He keeps up the pressure, yelling at her to get straight into the house and stay put because she isn't allowed to leave. He raises the knife even higher, giving her one last warning that she better not make a single sound. Suddenly, things take a turn. Furim calls out to Markia as the muscular woman starts shaking and grabbing at her neck. Markia's collar starts glowing and she begins to gag, looking like she's being choked by the magic inside of it. She loses her balance and collapses right onto the dirt, completely out of it while Furim watches in total shock. Pakis tells her it's no use trying to help, just as the slave overseer Logan shows up right behind him. Furim can't believe her eyes and stammers out Logan's name while he kneels down to deal with Markia. Without saying a word, Logan just hoists the unconscious woman onto his shoulder and starts walking away. Furim starts panicking, thinking that if Logan is still taking orders while being able to move freely, then he might actually be working with Mewed and she has to just stand there and watch as Logan carries the unconscious Markia off into the dark. Pakis starts walking away too, but he stops for a second to tell her he's sorry for all of this, even though he's still holding that knife, and tells her to get back away from the door immediately. He calls out a final order to Logan, saying if Furim tries to cause any trouble or makes a scene, Logan is free to just knock her out, and then he adds that it really doesn't matter, because no one is coming to save her from this situation anyway. Pakis looks pretty down as he gives her a final goodbye and turns to leave her behind. And just like that, the door slams shut, leaving Furim standing alone in the middle of the room. She hears the sound of the lock clicking into place from the outside, and Furim just grabs her head in total stress, wondering what on earth is even going on with her life right now. Logan just turns around and starts walking away, leaving Furim sitting there on the floor, shaking from the fear and stress of it all. She looks completely wrecked, clutching her chest and barely holding back her tears. Moving on, the room is pitch black as Logan sits on the floor. His eyes are hidden in the shadows while Furim just stares at him. Markia reaches over and puts a hand on the girl's shoulder to try and comfort her, but Furim can't even look up. She's just thinking to herself about how crazy this whole situation has become. Her mind is racing with questions about why her reward was taken, if Logan was in on it, and why she's trapped. She curls into a ball, feeling totally lost and telling herself she doesn't understand a single thing anymore. Suddenly, Logan drops down and puts his head to the floor in a deep bow. He just stays there while Furim stares at him with wide eyes, completely stunned by what he's doing until she finally finds her voice. She yells at him that she doesn't understand what he means and demands that he explains himself. Furim is still sitting on the ground, practically begging Logan to say something. She even tells him it's an order. Logan looks totally stressed out as he points toward his throat. He's sweating and seems like he literally can't get any words out. Furim looks at him and asks if he's actually unable to speak at all. As she watches him kneel there, she starts to realize that the guy doesn't actually seem to have any bad intentions toward her. She hesitates for a second before asking if he'd try to stop her if she just decided to leave the place right then. Logan quickly shakes his head no, making it clear he isn't going to get in her way. Furim goes even further and asks if he's there to kill her, but Logan shakes his head even harder. She can tell that's definitely not why he's sticking around. She starts thinking about how both Logan and Mude had these really miserable looks on their faces. It makes her wonder if there's some crazy situation going on, so she tells the others that Logan isn't a threat. Furim looks up and realizes they're totally stuck, so she tells the others there's no way out and they should just take a break for a while. Logan and the other girl stand there looking pretty stressed out by the whole situation. Furim ends up sitting by herself against the wooden wall, looking completely worn out. She just rests her head on her knees and stares at the floor while she waits for something to change. After sitting there in the dark for what feels like half a day, she hears a sudden noise that makes her eyes snap wide open. It's a loud, heavy sound coming from the entrance. She stays low on the ground, listening to the banging of the lock until she finally turns around to see who's actually there. The heavy wooden door slowly starts to swing open. Dugga steps into the room with that same intense look on his face, and Furim can't help but call out to the boss. Seeing him there makes her question if the guy is actually an ally or. Dugga looks down at the floor and says the brats did something bad, while Furim just sits there listening until he looks her right in the eye and tells her to get out. He starts walking toward the exit, and Furim watches him go while calling out for the boss. She stops when she notices someone else is standing right outside the door, and she sees Pakis and Mullard waiting for her. Mullard looks pretty rough with bruises on his face. Being together again brings back memories of how the three of them used to be, just hanging out like a normal group of friends before all this mess started happening. Mullard looks down at the floor with a sad smile and tells her that he's sorry. The room goes quiet as Dugga just stands in the back with his arms crossed, making Furim look back at him totally lost. She finally asks what he even means by that. Everything finally comes out into the open. The full story is told as Furim listens, and it turns out this whole mess was actually for the sake of Pakis' mother, Lackeys. Mude was always close with Pakis, so he cared about Lackeys just as much. But then things took a turn for the worse when she got sick and they had no way to pay for medicine. After the fight they had, Pakis reached a breaking point and tried to steal money straight from the boss, but Mude ended up stopping him. Lackeys was in critical condition and they were totally out of cash, so being cornered, Mude decided to take the reward from Lord Berser, thinking he could finally buy the medicine. The plan was to use that grimoire to cover any other costs that came up, but even though he got the medicine, Dugga found out, and that's how everything ended up like this. Logan stands there with his head down, apologizing to the young lady for everything, and Furim just looks at him, asking why he even decided to get involved in this mess. Mude speaks up, explaining that if Pakis had actually attacked, Furim would have been the one getting stabbed, so he mentions how Logan was already aware of the bond between the two of them. It turns out Mude wanted to fix the situation before it got worse, which is why he asked Logan for help, making it clear that everything they did was also for Furim's sake. Logan stays silent, just looking down with a pretty heavy look on his face, while Mude turns to Pakis and tells him he needs to apologize too, because trying to stab someone is taking it way too far. He reminds the kid that they never would have gotten the cash for the medicine without Furim's help, and Pakis looks away with an annoyed face, finally muttering that he's sorry. Furim looks at Pakis and tells him he really needs to stop trying to stab people. Pakis just looks away with a frustrated sound, while Furim watches him wondering if the kid is actually sorry. Dugga speaks up next, apologizing to her and offering to buy her whatever she wants if she'll just let it go. He looks back at her and asks if she has anything specific in mind, which honestly catches her by surprise, but she gets excited and says she wants a staff since she's only ever read about them in books. Dugga looks a bit stressed, mentioning how she definitely knows how to pick out the most expensive gear, but he decides to go for it, telling her she just better make herself useful once she actually has it. Then he holds out a heavy-looking bag, telling her that this part is a separate reward for her. Furim's eyes go wide as she realizes the bag is completely stuffed with gold coins, and Dugga explains she earned it for working so hard, especially since the gambling den has been doing so well. Dugga hands over the heavy bag, telling Furim it's just some extra cash and she should just take it. Furim watches him, thinking to herself that he must be doing all of this for Lady Lacus's sake, but everything starts to shift once word gets out about what they did back at Lord Balthazar's mansion. Dugga puts the whole crew to work cleaning his brothels and auction houses, turning every single day into a chaotic mess. The guys mention that the boss did ask Lord Balthazar to get that staff ready for her, but there's a delay because the Lord is apparently way too busy with ceremony prep, so it's going to take some time to finish. That ceremony has the entire capital packed with people, and because of the crowds, Dugga's gang is doing better than ever. Furim stands in the middle of the mess, staring down at a huge pile of stuff that needs cleaning. She looks completely miserable, complaining about how bad the place stinks and how she can't even sleep, especially since people keep sending piles of laundry as a thank you for her work, making her wonder how things got this bad. Furim is losing it over the laundry, wondering if it's even normal to wear clothes this much, especially since everything they have is second-hand. She keeps going, complaining that the smell is just the worst because they tried to cover up the stench with perfume, which only made it worse. She's reached her limit and thinks to herself that if she has to stay in this room any longer, her nose is basically going to die. Furim reaches out with total determination. She's finally taking charge. She marches over to Kedin and Morga, looking like she's on a mission. Kedin looks up and asks her what the deal is this late at night, wanting to know if she's even doing okay. But she just tells him she feels like she's about to collapse, and Kedin can't help but notice that her eyes look completely dead. She explains that there are some things about the work she wants to fix, asking if she can give them some suggestions for improvement. And before they can even answer, she starts yelling about how they need to fix the money calculations first, especially since those copper coins are a nightmare. She tells them they should just stuff the coins into old broken bottles and measure the weight instead of counting them all by hand. Furim is on a roll now, telling them they need to get a unified uniform for everyone working the gambling den, and she doesn't stop there, suggesting they add even more events like having small animals race each other. She explains that cute animals bring in women, which makes the men act better and makes the place look classier, while Kedin listens closely, but then she gets even more intense, shouting that there is one thing that matters more than everything else. Since mortality is down and they have extra slaves, she says they need to start a cleaning business immediately, finally finishing her huge rant with a long sigh that leaves the guys standing there completely stunned. She tells them they can deal with the details tomorrow, but for right now she's just going to sleep in this room. Kedin tells her he gets it and she should just go to bed, even though it's noisy, but Furim says it'll be a breeze, as she flops down and mumbles a good night to the boss, basically passing out on the spot. Kedin immediately tells the rest of the crew to shut up and keep it down while she rests. Furim finally starts to stir, letting out a groggy noise as she slowly wakes up sitting up on the couch. She asks why she was sleeping there and why everyone is acting weird, but the guys just stare back in total silence. Dugga looks down at her and says she was just tired, reminding her she's still just a kid, which really surprises her. So she starts panicking, apologizing and saying she must have messed up or acted out of line somehow. Dugga just brushes it off, telling her that kids are supposed to spend their time eating, sleeping, and growing. But then he tells her to eat up, because once she's done, he wants the full breakdown on those business improvements she mentioned. Furim just stands there with a blank look, asking what improvements he's even talking about. Dugga doesn't let her off the hook, saying she's definitely going to give him all those details right. Furim starts sweating, completely losing it as she wonders what kind of crazy stuff she said before passing out, while the scene shifts away to a quiet, dark hallway lined with heavy iron bars. The older man takes Furim to a workspace, and she sounds pretty confused as she asks if he's really calling this the laundry department. She tries to play it cool and says yes, but on the inside, she's freaking out because everything is moving way faster than she expected. Markia stands there looking a bit lost, asking what she's even supposed to do since she's never done a day of laundry in her life. Furim looks at her and points out that because of her beastman blood, her sense of smell must be way better than a normal person's. So she wants Markia to be the one in charge of doing the final odor checks and keeping all the workers focused on the job. Furim admits that being the one to keep everyone in line might be a little difficult at first, but she explains that there are always going to be some people who just won't work unless there's someone right there telling them what to do. Markia gets a huge grin on her face, looking like she's actually into the idea, and tells Furim she's got it under control. Then Furim turns to Almuroy and asks him to oversee the actual laundry training, making sure he watches everyone so nobody starts slacking off, and Almuroy just gives her a quiet, serious nod to show he's on board with the plan. Furim turns to Terrarine and tells her to take charge of explaining the laundry steps to the other workers. And Terrarine gets super pumped, yelling out that she's ready to do it. She turns to Almuroy, all excited because now the two of them get to work together. Almuroy just stands there with his usual stone-cold expression, not saying a single word or moving a muscle. Terrarine cheers, saying her brother looks really happy about the news, which sends Furim into a total spiral. She's looking at his scary face and realizes that maybe he hasn't actually been glaring at her this whole time. It hits her like a ton of bricks. That terrifying look he's got is actually just his normal, everyday face. Terrarine admits his expressions are tough for people to read, but she points at him and asks if he doesn't look joyful right then. Furim just stares at him with a blank look and tells her she doesn't see it at all, while the other guys start carrying the laundry loads. As they walk, Furim casually asks the group how the three of them even ended up as slaves. She follows up by saying they don't have to share if it's too much, but she'd honestly like to hear their story if they're up for it. Markia starts opening up, telling Furim that she actually used to be an adventurer, a monster hunter specifically. She explains that her old partner racked up a massive debt and just vanished into thin air, leaving her to take the fall. To her, this place isn't the worst it beats working in a brothel, and she still gets to carry a weapon. She finishes her story with a casual shrug, saying that's basically how she drifted into this whole situation. Turning the focus away from herself, Markia looks over at Almuroy and Terrarine and asks them what their deal is. Terrarine speaks up for the siblings, explaining that even though they look different, they're still part of the lizardman race. She admits the human blood in them is just really strong, which is why they don't look like typical lizardmen. The conversation gets pretty heavy as she talks about their homeland. Apparently, the wetlands they lived in completely dried up from a drought. Everything was dying out, and there was eventually no food or water left for the people there. Because they were half-breeds and resources were low, their own village decided to sell them off into slavery. Terrarine looks down, her expression going a bit soft as she starts to say there's more to the story. As they walk, Almuroy drops a bombshell and says he killed his master, but makes sure to add that Terrarine didn't do anything wrong. The muscular woman looks totally lost and says she isn't following, asking him to explain what he actually means. Terrarine speaks up to apologize for him, saying her brother is just a really bad storyteller and needs some help. She explains that the slave trader who bought them was expecting a typical strong-looking lizardman, not someone who looked human. The guy felt ripped off and started losing it, shouting at the top of his lungs about how he'd been cheated. Terrarine's voice gets quiet as she remembers how that drunkard started getting violent and hitting her. Almuroy was locked in the room right next door, but he couldn't just sit there. He smashed through the door to save her. She points out that they were just in a small, shaky shack at the time, which made things even worse. When he broke through, the whole place shook so hard that a heavy beam fell from the ceiling and crushed the merchant. Almuroy looks down at the floor and mutters that the whole thing was just a total accident. Terrarine keeps explaining the situation, saying that the merchant who had them was actually in debt to Lord Dugga. That's the only reason they ended up here in the first place. She goes on to say that her brother was forced to become a combat slave, while she ended up as a needlewoman because she was always pretty good at sewing. Furim walks behind them in the hallway, thinking to herself about how heavy their lives have been. It's a lot to take in, and she just stares ahead with a really serious look on her face. Logan notices her expression and tells her she shouldn't let all of this weigh on her heart. He can tell she's feeling bad, but he reminds her that everyone is just doing their best to survive, and that goes for every single one of them. He smiles a bit and tells her they're only alive right now because she looked out for them, while the rest of the group follows along behind her. They all actually look pretty happy and relieved. Furim looks back at them, totally surprised that they feel that way about her. Furim tells Logan he's right and admits she might have been acting a bit full of herself lately, so she decides it's time for everyone to snap out of it and start getting the laundry done. She stands in front of a pile of stuff and says they're going to use these clothes for a test run. Looking at the mess, she explains she really wants to get through the massive pile from her room first. While the others look on totally confused, Furim starts feeling a bit guilty about using her authority to handle her personal chores. She jokingly thinks to herself that she's turned into a pretty wicked person without even noticing it, but she pushes those thoughts aside and yells for everyone to finally get to work. The tub is just sitting there, packed with laundry and ready to go. Furim focuses and calls out for the water to strike, and just like that, a massive swirl of water bursts out and starts washing everything at high speed. Furim realizes this new method is actually working out better than she thought, and she remembers seeing something on TV back in her old life about using vibrations to clean things like a pro. As she watches the water work, she can see the dirt lifting right off the fabric, so she tries something else and figures out she can make hydrogen peroxide to bleach and kill germs too. This gets her thinking that their little laundry side hustle might actually turn into a massive success. She stands there with a totally serious look while processing the possibilities. Dugga notices her intense expression and asks what's bothering her, so she turns to him. She comes clean and tells him the laundry business isn't actually doing that great because the clothes get clean, but the cheap fabric just falls apart, which leaves Dugga nodding along as he suggests they just reuse the ruined clothes, making Furim wonder what he's actually thinking. Dugga explains that once the big ceremony in the capital is over, the market is going to be flooded with a ton of cheap used goods, and he plans to buy them up and mix them with the ruined fabric so they don't waste a single thing. With a confident smirk, he tells Furim that the goal is to take over the sewing department next. He figures if they're going to be in business at all, they might as well go big and take over everything, which makes Furim comment that it's exactly the kind of talk she expects from a boss who leads hundreds of men. She gets a little bold and tells him that if that's the case, he needs to start delegating work to people who are actually capable. Furim continues her little lecture, saying there's no reason for a top boss like him to be handling all the money sorting on his own. She suddenly realizes she's being way too talkative and starts panicking, stuttering out an apology for being out of line. Dugga just stands there for a second before telling her that she's actually right about everything, and he pats her on the head, admitting her advice really hit home and she's making some solid points. Dugga keeps his hand on Furim's head while opening up about his past, telling her how when he was a kid, people used to trick him all the time, and it caused him to fail a lot. He says that's why he stopped letting other people handle things, and since he's successful now, he figured staying that way was fine. He gets a serious look in his eyes, admitting that's at least what he thought until now, making Furim just look up at him, quietly calling him boss as she listens to him vent. She starts thinking about how, back in her old life, she would have seen a guy like him, someone who kills without a second thought, as a total piece of trash. But she's starting to realize it's different here. In this world, that kind of stuff is just a normal part of life. She looks at the crew and realizes they're all uneducated, meaning they don't even have a clear sense of what's right or wrong, which is why they have to beat the idea of a hierarchy into them just to keep everyone in line. It's the only way to create any real discipline. At the end of the day, everyone in this world is just desperate to survive. And Dugga finishes by saying that even though their group is growing, his sons still don't trust each other, they're all still just fighting over money. Dugga gets a serious look in his eyes, telling Furim that they just can't keep going on the way they have been and that even he has to change. He explains that she really needs to understand what it actually takes to be the person at the top. Furim looks up at him, finally realizing that even though he's a criminal, the boss really lives by his own strong set of beliefs. She stands there looking small next to him, but she finds her voice and calls him boss with a new level of respect, giving him a big smile while promising that she's going to do her absolute best to help him out. The scene shifts to a busy town street, where a fancy carriage is rolling past a crowd of people. Inside, a young blonde boy stares out the window with a bored expression, thinking to himself about how tedious his life is. He thinks about how everyone treats this like some big, important tradition passed down from their ancestors. But to him, having to travel around and visit all these different houses is just a massive pain that he'd rather avoid. The heavy wooden wheels of the carriage just keep on turning as the group makes its way toward their next stop. The blonde boy checks if they're visiting the Duragan family today, and his attendant confirms that's the plan. He remembers there's supposed to be a statue of him nearby, but thinks looking at it is just too embarrassing for him. They walk past the fancy building where the stone statue stands tall out front, but as the boy actually gets inside and starts heading up the main staircase, he gets this weird feeling that something about the place is totally different than it used to be. He sees that everything is polished to a crazy shine, not just the statue, but the walls and the handrails too, so he touches the wall, thinking about how the Duragan family definitely shouldn't have the cash to fix the place up like this. He asks what the deal is, and his attendant looks a little caught off guard, explaining that some merchant with big connections apparently has a personal mage who uses a very rare type of magic. The boy just gives a little smile as it finally clicks for him. The blonde boy thinks the whole situation sounds pretty interesting. Meanwhile, Furim stares at a coin, figuring her modern knowledge and magic will be enough to get by. Suddenly, Berser bursts in and apologizes to Dugga, yelling that he needs to borrow Furim. He stands right in the doorway while Dugga and Furim are just sitting there at the table. Dugga isn't having it though, telling him he's not lending her out and asking what's wrong with him. Berser just insists that it's for work, but he clarifies it's a request from the royal palace, way higher than the main house, before asking to take her again. Dugga loses his cool and grabs Berser by the shirt, asking if he sold Furim out to his old man. Berser tries to keep it together and tells him not to get the wrong idea, explaining that there was a huge chance his father would have just shown up here himself. Berser finishes explaining that he actually ditched his own work and rushed over as fast as he could because he told the higher-ups about how a merchant's mage cleaned the statue, and now they're obsessed with the idea. Dugga loses it and starts shaking him, yelling that this is all his fault and he just brought a ton of trouble to their door. Kedin looks over at Furim, totally stressed out, and asks what the plan is or if they should just make a run for it. Furim is panicking too, just wondering what they're even supposed to do in a mess like this, while Dugga starts to calm down and get serious, realizing that orders involving the palace are something they can't just ignore. He points out that running isn't an option because it would put both Furim and the shop in huge danger, and Kedin agrees that's true, but he still looks pretty unsure about how the boss is handling things. Furim speaks up, asking the most important question: what kind of work are they even being forced to do? Dugga grabs her by the shoulders and admits he doesn't know, but he knows they're stuck in this together. Furim realizes that once she hears the actual details of the job, there's no way she'll be able to turn it down, so she clenches her fist, knowing that running away would just put the whole gambling den in danger. But there's more to it. Berser points out that since this whole mess started because the higher-ups were impressed by how clean she got that statue, Furim flashes a confident smile and says as long as she does a solid job, things are bound to work out somehow. Dugga just stands there looking completely lost. He can't believe she's being this optimistic about a royal order. The guy looks totally stressed, sweating as he tries to keep up with the situation. Furim looks at the guys and reminds them that Dugga and Berser have both trusted her with plenty of work up until now. And because of that, she wants to keep believing in the boss who took her in and in Master Berser's judgment too. She looks straight ahead with total determination, vowing to prove that her work is good enough for any noble to recognize. Dugga finally lets out a heavy sigh. He tells her that if she's really going that far, she might as well give it a shot. Dugga yells at Furim to make sure she's extremely careful with this job. She just smiles and gives him a loud yes, which leads to Berser nervously touching his neck, asking about the fact that he just got punched but Dugga isn't having it. He shouts at Berser to get to work since he's the one who brought this mess over, and they have a broken wall to fix, making Berser snap back that Dugga was the one who introduced him to Furim first, though he eventually just gives in and says fine. Later on, Furim sits quietly in a room, while Logan stands nearby keeping watch. Things are finally settling down, as Logan repeats that she's really heading to the royal palace. She just looks down and quietly confirms it. Logan reaches out toward her as she sits there lost in her own thoughts for a second, and then he holds out a gift, telling her she should take these items with her if she wants. So Furim looks up at him, sounding a bit confused as she asks what they're actually for, which is when Logan explains they're just a wooden bowl and spoon, but warns her that someone with lower status might not even get a meal without them. Furim holds onto the wooden bowl and spoon Logan gave her, and quietly says thank you, realizing things have been pretty awkward between them since that whole mess with Mude, but looking at the gift, she can tell he was actually still looking out for her the whole time. Logan kneels down to look her in the eye and tells her to take care of herself, so Furim gives him a big smile and a loud, energetic yes before heading out. Later on, she follows Dugga into a back room filled with old boxes and furniture, where Dugga looks back and tells her he's taking her to his special secret spot, which makes Furim pretty nervous as she watches him reach his hand into a hole next to a pitch-black door. She starts thinking there must be some kind of high-level magic trick or hidden machine, but then Dugga just grunts and pulls with all his might, yelling that he's just using brute force to open it. Dugga yells at her to stop making a scene and get inside before someone spots them, while Furim just sits there feeling totally confused about what's going on, but then they step inside, and she's instantly floored by all the high-end gear piled up everywhere. She can't help but think about how much all this stuff must be worth, especially since the place is packed with treasures, making her realize it definitely lives up to the hype of being a secret hideout. Dugga starts digging through the piles, saying they can't be too careful, and hands her some clothes to try on, which he explains is necessary because they need to look like they actually belong in a royal palace. Furim goes to change and then calls out to him to get his attention, and once she's all decked out in the new outfit, she spins around and asks him what he thinks of the look. Dugga tells her not to overthink it, and admits the clothes actually look pretty good on her, even though Furim is still a little stressed out, asking him if he's really sure about this since the outfit looks way too expensive for her to be wearing. Dugga just keeps moving stuff around, saying there's no point in letting nice things just sit in a box and go to waste. Dugga keeps grabbing more items from the piles and even hands Furim some cash to make sure she's ready, so Furim holds onto everything tightly, looking pretty stressed as she tells him she's not sure if she can ever pay him back for all this, but he just tells her not to worry about it. He explains that everything they're taking from the hideout is meant for emergencies anyway, so it's better to use it now while he gives her a serious heads up about the royal palace, warning her that it's packed with all kinds of people and that she's already lost if she lets them look down on her. Dugga looks a little unsure for a second, wondering if the gear they have is even going to be enough, but then he tells her he's sure she'll be fine regardless. Furim looks up at him with a huge smile, feeling way more relieved as she thanks him for all the help, but then Dugga realizes they're still missing the knife and the staff, mentioning that he really wanted to wait for Versal to show up and help with the staff specifically. Furim just nods along, noting that Lord Versal still seems like he's got way too much on his plate to help them out right now. Dugga looks back at her and explains that having a staff is actually a huge deal for their plan, especially since people treat mages who carry a staff completely differently than the ones who don't. Dugga keeps digging through the gear, explaining that while some people can use magic without a staff, having a match makes a world of difference. He mentions that it's all about the compatibility between the tool and the user, though he accidentally picks up a pen first, which makes Furim wonder if he's actually found anything useful. He gets a bit quiet for a second, mentioning that his own father spent a long time looking for a staff that would suit him, but they never ended up finding one that worked. Furim is surprised to hear him mention his dad, but Dugga immediately gets annoyed with himself for sharing too much and tells her to just forget he said anything. The room goes completely quiet. It's a total mood killer, and Furim can't help but feel like things just got super awkward between them. To break the tension, Furim finds a small, thin wand and points out how easy it is to hold, asking Dugga what he thinks about this one. Dugga takes one look and realizes it's actually a dark attribute staff, which catches Furim off guard since she didn't expect to pick up something like that. Even though it's a dark weapon, she realizes it feels right like her magic is actually flowing through it way smoother than anything else she's tried. Dugga mentions the staff used to belong to an assassin, which makes Furim freak out a bit because the whole vibe of the weapon is starting to feel way too ominous. Dugga tells her to just keep it anyway, since having a weapon with a sketchy history is still way better than going in empty-handed. Furim agrees and officially adds the staff to her gear, finally getting the last piece of equipment she needs for the trip. Outside, the sun starts to go down over the city buildings as the day finally comes to an end. Barsel swings the door open to find Furim, casually letting her know he's arrived to pick her up. But suddenly someone's hand clamps down over her mouth, cutting her off with a muffled noise, and it turns out it's just Dugga, who tells his brother to shut up and calls him an idiot for being so loud while Furim is fast asleep in her bed, completely oblivious to everything. The two brothers stand in the doorway looking at her, and Dugga points out she probably stayed up too late reading and just crashed. So Barsel watches her sleep, finally realizing that despite everything she's done, she really is just a kid, and Dugga asks if she can sleep a bit longer, explaining that she's had a really rough few days and is totally worn out. Since they have to get moving, Dugga tells Barsel to just pick her up and carry her while she sleeps. Then Barsel smiles and says he doesn't mind at all, especially since he's the one asking her for a favor in the first place. Dugga gets a serious look on his face, telling his brother to make sure he brings everyone back safe. Barsel just gives a small, confident smile as they get ready to head out, but when Dugga pushes for a guarantee, Barsel admits he can't actually make any promises, which makes Dugga lose it, yelling at his brother to tell him for sure that he'll bring everyone back safely. Dugga slugs him hard in the shoulder, calling him a shitty brother and telling him to show some backbone. Barsel winces from the hit, while Dugga barks at him to just leave already, and all the noise finally starts waking Furim up. Furim's eyes snap wide open in total shock as she suddenly yells out, finding herself inside a moving carriage with Barsel sitting right across from her, looking completely lost. She panics and asks if he's been kidnapped, but Barsel just tells her to chill out and realize who he is. It finally clicks for her and she feels embarrassed, apologizing for being so rude since she just realized she fell asleep. Barsel tells her it's fine and to just look out the window at what's coming up. Furim leans out the carriage window, completely floored by the fact that she's actually looking at the royal palace. She can't even help herself and lets out a loud shout as the fancy carriage rolls through the grounds. Once they get inside, she just stands there staring up at the massive, high ceilings of the main hall, taking in the view of the huge open courtyard, and the fancy fountain sitting right in the middle. Barsel gestures toward the giant white castle and tells Furim that this is officially where she's going to be working. And as they follow a night through the halls, the reality of the situation finally starts to sink in. Barsel stops and points out her first spot, telling her she's going to start by cleaning right here, giving her a bit of a smug look as he says he's giving her an assignment to handle right away. Furim's jaw just drops and she lets out a massive scream because she's totally freaking out, realizing she's spent the entire day doing absolutely nothing. Furim starts stressing out, wondering if she's really going to be stuck like this for days. Meanwhile, Barsel is just chilling, giving a thumbs up and saying his only job is to wait. The reality of the palace hits her, and she starts panicking about not belonging there, especially since the carpets in the private room are way softer than anything she's ever felt. There's a knock at the door and Barcel lets her know he's coming in, calling her by the name Flim as he enters. He walks into the room and gestures toward the door, telling her there's someone he wants to introduce her to. A man with glasses and gloves named Nick Lesson introduces himself with a polite smile, telling her it's a pleasure to meet her. Barcel explains that he's asked Nick to look after her, mostly because he can't be around her every second of the day. Furim looks up at the new guy, looking a bit surprised, but she keeps it polite and tells him it's nice to meet him too. Barcel crosses his arms and lets her know the wait might be a long one, telling her she needs to be ready for things to take a few days. He looks over at her and admits that sitting in a private room all day is probably going to get pretty boring. But he mentions there's a courtyard nearby she can use, even telling her it's cool if she wants to head out there and practice her magic. Barcel gives a nod and says he understands, while Furim is just relieved, thinking she can finally get away from the boredom for a bit. She heads out to the palace courtyard where there's a big fountain and stone arches, which gives her the perfect spot to shout for a water blade and fire a stream of magic from her staff. The magic hits a massive rock and splashes everywhere as she puts her skills to the test. Furim takes a second to think about how she's been using all this extra free time to practice new magic, but she realizes that trying to control her mana through a staff is actually pretty tough. Looking at the wand, she notices that only about half the power she's putting in is actually making it out. She walks through the garden thinking she'd love to clean up the place, but she knows it's a bad idea to touch things without asking first. Then she gets a little look on her face, realizing that practicing magic here might actually change how everyone sees her. She stands tall, hoping she won't just be known as the peasant kid with the cleaning tools anymore. Furim stands in the garden feeling pretty good about herself, thinking she finally feels like some kind of great wizard. She holds her chin with a smug little smile, telling herself that things really aren't looking bad at all. But then someone suddenly yells out to get her attention, which totally kills her vibe and makes her jump. A young guy with dark hair and a scarf walks up and asks her why she's out here practicing magic. He's got this weirdly bright and sparkling look to him as he smiles down at her, making Furim stare at his beat-up clothes while she wonders who this guy is even supposed to be. She notices that even though his outfit is basically in tatters, his hair and nails are actually super clean. It strikes her as really strange, almost like he's just pretending to be poor and dressed up to look dirty on purpose. The guy leans in and tells her she looks like she comes from a really good family, which instantly sets off alarm bells in her head, leaving her standing there with a nervous, shaky smile because he's acting way too suspicious. The guy stands there looking way too confident for someone wearing rags, just staring Furim down with a grin. Furim starts feeling the pressure of the awkward silence, so she nervously asks if she can say something to him. The guy doesn't hesitate at all. He throws his arms out and says he's just an apprentice servant, so he's all ears. Furim watches him and immediately thinks there is no way on earth a real servant would ever act like this guy. But she tries to keep it polite, telling him that even as an apprentice, he still works for high-ranking nobles, which is a big deal compared to her, since she explains that she only works for a merchant and is just a commoner. Because of the gap in their status, she tells him it's only natural for her to show him some proper respect. The guy thinks her reaction is hilarious and calls her interesting. Then he tells her that even though he's technically a noble, he's basically a commoner at heart and wants her to just talk to him normally. Furim gets even more suspicious, wondering if this dude is actually telling the truth about being a noble, but she just goes along with it and tells him she gets it. She starts worrying that she's acting way too mature for her age and needs to dial it back to seem like a normal kid, right when the guy suddenly shouts that he's got an idea.